Hey guys, tonight I've got 10 special scary stories just for you. Stories that don't just live in the dark, they feed on it. This is the place where sleep turns into shadows and the whispers, they're not just in your head. So turn off your room light, lock your door, and don't look behind you. Let the darkness in, and before we begin, get comfortable. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy my stories. And hey, drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. What time is it for you right now? It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now let's begin. It was the first winter I spent completely alone. I thought the silence would be peaceful until I realized it wasn't silence at all. I'd closed on a small split level in central New Jersey that summer, the kind of street with vinyl fences and weekly HOA emails about keeping trash cans out of sight. I'm 29, a project manager who lives inside spreadsheets more than conversations. After a breakup in August, I told myself the quiet would be good for me. I didn't expect the quiet to pay attention. Halloween fell on a Thursday and I stopped by a friend's party in Red Bank after work. I didn't commit to a real costume, just a hoodie with a dollar store cape clipped to the collar to look like I tried. At 1:07 a.m., my 2013 Civic rolled into our cul-de-sac, which looked drowned in wet leaves and sagging fake cobwebs. My garage motion light snapped on as I turned into the driveway, and that's when I saw it, an oversized pumpkin sitting perfectly centered on the concrete like it belonged there. I actually laughed at first because it took a second for my brain to catch up to my eyes. The pumpkin was carved with a face, and the face was mine. Not kind of mine, exactly mine, down to the square jaw and the chip in one front tooth I got playing high school baseball. Whoever carved it knew me better than Instagram ever could. That weird, itchy feeling went through my scalp while I pretended it was just a really good prank. I parked, stepped out, and lifted it off the driveway. The candle inside guttered and went out and left that cold, sweet smell of fresh pumpkin in the air. I snapped a picture and texted my friends Evan and Matt. Haha, very funny. There was no note, no plastic carving tools left on the ground, and the cut lines were clean like someone experienced had done it. I set it by the porch column to get it off the concrete, locked it up, and went inside, telling myself I'd laugh about it in the morning. Morning was different. When I opened the door at 8:32 a.m., I paused with my hand on the knob because the expression looked off. The smile was softer, and the brows angled down a hair like it had slept badly. I took another photo to compare so I could prove to myself it was just lighting. Then I dragged the pumpkin to the end of the driveway next to the garbage can for Friday pickup and left for the office. After work, a cold mist slicked the street and turned the stop sign glossy. I pulled in and felt the hair on my arms stand up under my jacket. The face wasn't like the morning's either. The mouth had turned down slightly and the eyes had a sharper angle like it was concentrating. I checked the two photos on my phone and realized I was looking at 3 different expressions. I squatted and peered underneath for some kind of projector or battery pack, but there was only wet concrete and dirt. I moved it to the curb again and pushed the can right to the edge so there be no confusion for the sanitation guys. Inside, I did my routine, flipped the deadbolt on the side door, checked the deck slider twice, and pulled the living room blinds all the way down until the slats rested on the sill. I microwaved leftovers and scrolled until my eyes hurt. At 12:33 a.m., my phone buzzed with a ring motion alert from the garage camera, and I almost dropped it when I opened the live view. The pumpkin was back in the middle of the driveway. It sat perfectly centered in the motion light's cone, throwing a long shadow at the garage door like it had been placed with a tape measure. The face, my face, looked angrier than it had any right to look, the cuts catching hard white light from the fixture. I called the non-emergency line because calling 911 over a pumpkin sounded insane, and the dispatcher told me they'd cruise by and that I should move it into my garage if it was causing me distress. I pulled on boots, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped into the cold. The neighborhood was quiet in that way where you can hear your own footsteps more than anything else. I lifted the pumpkin, feeling condensation on the base, and carried it into the garage. It felt wrong bringing it inside, so I set it beside the tool bench under the bright overhead light and, on a paranoid impulse, scattered a thin line of flour along the inside of the garage door and across the mudroom threshold before going upstairs. At 7:10 a.m., the flour was undisturbed. Not a smudge, not a streak, like nobody had crossed either line. But the pumpkin wasn't in the garage. It was back in the center of my driveway like someone had measured the distance out of spite. The expression had changed again, shallow half-moons under the eyes like bags and a mouth that looked tired. I opened the Ring app to check the alert from 2:14 a.m. and the clip existed, but when I tapped it, it was 15 seconds of static. I was useless at work and spent lunch Googling animated jack-o'-lanterns. I found DIY projectors and a guy on TikTok faking expressions with a phone screen, but nothing explained mine moving around with no footprints and no neighbor noticing. That night I signed my initials on the underside with a Sharpie, and cut a small notch into the back so I'd know if it got swapped. I pushed it against my front step, turned off the porch light to avoid weird shadows, and set an iPad recording through the window. At 1:52 a.m., another motion alert woke me up. The live view showed an empty driveway, and I watched until the motion light timed out and the screen went dim. Around 2:20 a.m., my eyes finally closed. In the morning, the iPad had recorded 1 minute, my dark yard, a flicker of static, and then a corner of orange sliding into frame before the file corrupted. The pumpkin waited at the foot of my front steps, tilted toward the door like it was trying to listen. My initials were still on the underside, and the notch was there too. I posted the whole thing in the neighborhood Facebook group because I wanted someone to admit it was them. The replies were predictable. One guy telling me to buy a gun and a mom complaining bored teens were acting up. Mr. Daniels across the street that he'd seen a tall person wandering the cul-de-sac around 3 a.m. a couple nights earlier, but without details. By dinner I'd had enough. I double-bagged the pumpkin, duct-taped the trash can lid like I was wrapping a present for the dump, and dragged the can to the curb early. At 3:03 a.m., a heavy clunk followed by a wet scraping sound pulled me upright in bed. I went downstairs, looked through the peephole, and saw the trash can on its side in the street, the duct tape peeled back like someone had worried it was loose with fingernails. A trail of seeds and stringy pulp led up the driveway to where the pumpkin sat in the exact middle like a person catching their breath after a jog. 2 officers showed up within 10 minutes and swept the yard with flashlights while I tried and failed to play the static-filled ring clip for them. One suggested changing my router channel because cameras can interfere. The other half joked about taking the pumpkin as property. They told me to call again if something else happened and rolled off into the quiet. I popped the Civic's trunk because I refused to bring it inside again. The pumpkin landed with a wet thud and I slammed the lid. I checked it twice, clicked, locked, done, and went upstairs to salvage a couple hours before work. In the morning, the trunk rested against the latch like someone had lifted it and let it settle, and the pumpkin was gone. A wet ring stained the liner, and that sweet rot smell hung in the cold like cheap perfume. I found the pumpkin back on the porch where I'd set it the first night. The face looked like me right then, puffy eyes, tight crooked mouth, even the tiny splinter scar under my left eye I'd had since I was 7. I stood there with my keys in my hand and felt ridiculous standing off with a vegetable. That evening I went all in on cameras. I set the iPad in the window again, propped an old Android on a stack of mail facing the door, and angled my work laptop so the webcam watched the back slider. I taped a note over the pumpkin in block letters, "Stop, I'm calling the police." I poured a ring of table salt around the base because doing something felt better than doing nothing, even if it was superstitious and dumb. At 12:47 a.m., the iPad saved a clip of the pumpkin half in frame, as if someone set it down just out of view. The video went grainy and then black. Upstairs, something soft tapped wood, and the house smelled like someone had opened a cooler full of pumpkin guts. I flicked my bedroom lamp and stared at a single pumpkin seed sitting alone on my nightstand like a period at the end of a sentence. When I got back to the living room, the pumpkin was positioned at the base of the front window, tilted up at the slats. The carved eyes were closed, and the mouth was parted just enough to suggest a breath. In the dark glass, my reflection unconsciously matched it, and that scared me more than everything before it. I dialed 911, and my voice sounded calm in a way I didn't feel at all. I pulled the blinds down hard and backed into the hallway. The garage keypad made the faintest ticking sound, the slow pattern of someone pressing numbers they believed would work. I don't have it enabled. It's a leftover from the last owner that never connected to anything. The side yard motion light flared and washed the lawn white while I stood in the kitchen holding a useless chef's knife and listening to the house hum like a living thing. The officers came around 3:20 a.m. and we did a full walk through doors, windows, deck, basement, and found nothing disturbed. One squinted at the carving and said, "Real impressive work," then asked if I wanted them to take it. I said no without being able to explain why I needed it where I could see it. He told me to consider staying with a friend for a few nights, and I agreed even though agreeing didn't feel like a solution. At 9:50 a.m. I checked the devices. The iPad file was corrupted, and the Android had exactly 2 clips. At 2:19 a.m. a shape rose at the far edge of the driveway like someone had been crouched behind the mailbox and stood up too slowly to be normal. The frame froze and jumped, and the next clip wasn't the door at all, but my living room from a bookcase angle. At 2:33 a.m. I was asleep on the couch while the pumpkin sat unlit on the coffee table watching me. The real coffee table had a wet ring and a curl of orange rind stuck under the lip like a fingernail clipping. I went to the station and filed a report with a tired detective who asked if an ex or a coworker might want to spook me. He typed, printed something for me to sign, and said they'd increase patrols. It didn't sound like a promise so much as a script. That night I packed a duffel and decided not to sleep at home. As I locked up at 7:18 p.m., the pumpkin sat at the end of the driveway facing the street with what looked like a disappointed expression. I drove to Evan's apartment and parked under the brightest light in the lot. We watched a movie without talking much, and he fell asleep while I lay awake and waited to feel normal again. At 1:11 a.m., my phone buzzed, "Person at your front door." I opened the app because not looking felt worse. The whole screen was orange, the pumpkin pressed inches from the Ring camera, so close I could see the knife chatter in the cuts. The mouth had been changed into letters, and leaning in, I picked them out, spaced by teeth. JASON. The feed stuttered and flipped to a still of my bedroom blinds hanging open 2 inches even though I'd left them shut. We went back in daylight. Evan kept almost making jokes and then stopping mid-sentence. The house didn't feel empty, it felt paused. The pumpkin wasn't in the driveway or yard or garage. It sat centered on the upstairs landing like a guard dog, grinning too wide with a pool of candle wax hardened around the stem and tiny crescents of orange dotting each stair like footsteps going up. I changed the locks and called the police again. They took pictures and nodded in that way people do when they're waiting for you to get to the part that makes sense. The mustached officer told me, "Get a dog," and I said I would even though pets aren't allowed in my lease. After they left, I stuffed the pumpkin into 2 contractor bags, tied them tight, and drove it to the county park to leave in an overflowing trash can, then sat in my car and watched the truck pick it up at 2:05 p.m. That evening, an Amazon box sat on my doormat that I hadn't ordered. Inside was a plastic carving kit, a tea light, and a vacuum-sealed pack of seeds. The return address was my own name and my exact address, typed neatly like a label. I would make it work. There was no record in my order history. I taped the box closed and slid the deadbolt like cardboard and brass could keep ideas out. Saturday night, the last weekend before Halloween, I tried to pretend I was normal and watched a game with the volume low. At 11:26 p.m., the power flickered and died, and my phone hovered at 14%. A soft orange glow moved across the front window like someone walking with a candle. Against every instinct, I stepped close and saw the pumpkin on the porch railing at eye level. The candle lit and real twine threaded through the lids to hold the eyes painfully open. I called 911 and the operator said units were tied up and to stay on the line. Footsteps crossed the porch, heavy, deliberate, and the pumpkin slid out of the window's view. The front knob twitched twice and went still. A minute later, the back slider beeped like it does when it's left open too long, and when I got to the kitchen, the door stood cracked 3 inches and cold air poured in. I slammed it shut, locked it, and caught my reflection in the glass. For a split second, a taller, darker shape stood behind me, and then the kitchen light flickered and the room went still. I grabbed my keys, didn't bother with shoes, and drove. At 12:03 a.m., my phone buzzed with motion at living room, so I parked under a canopy light at a gas station on Route 35 and opened the feed because not looking felt worse than knowing. The camera showed my couch sitting in the dark like an animal and the pumpkin resting on it with the mustached officer's face carved into a smile. The candle glowed for a heartbeat and went out on camera like a breath. I didn't go back that night. I slept sitting up in the car, where the light made midnight look like noon. The next day I went back with Evan and the police. The house was neat and ordinary, which somehow felt worse than finding a mess. There was no twine, no wax, and no seeds anywhere. Under the coffee table we found a coin-sized oval of pumpkin skin, and scratched into it with a fine point were numbers, 1031. No year, just the date, like a reminder or a promise. I moved out that week and sold the place 2 months later to a couple who said the block felt so safe. Now I'm in a 3rd-floor apartment with beige walls and fire doors and no porch at all. I bought blackout curtains and kept the blinds closed even during the day. Still, some nights around 2:14 a.m., a soft orange glow leaks under the hallway fire door from the exit stairs, like someone is standing there with a candle and waiting. Last night, someone slid a glossy 4x6 photo under my apartment door. It was my old living room, taken from inside the house at an angle where no camera should have been. A new pumpkin sat on the rug with a face that looked like the older, more tired version of me I see now when I brush my teeth. On the back was an email address written in block letters with a subject line they wanted me to use, like we were co-authors. By the time I called the cops, it was too late for anything but a report and a drive-by that didn't catch a thing. I put the picture in a drawer and left the blinds closed. I'm not writing the address and I'm not answering. I don't want to know which window it's watching me from now on. This happened in 2020 during lockdown. Everyone was afraid of what was outside, but my fear came from inside my own house. Halloween, my fiance and I tried to keep things simple and safe. I was 29, working remotely from our rental in a quiet cul-de-sac outside Allentown, Pennsylvania. He's an EMT, which meant masking up wasn't a choice. We set out a folding table at the end of our short driveway with a hand sanitizer pump and a bowl of individually bagged mini candies. I ran a little PVC candy chute from the porch railing down to the table so kids wouldn't have to come all the way up. It felt overly cautious and a little silly, but it made the neighborhood parents smile as they took pictures. It was unseasonably cold for late October, one of those nights where you can see your breath and the streetlights make the air look dusty. Our front porch light was orange, and a motion-activated pumpkin lantern clicked on whenever someone stepped onto the walkway. We had a Ring doorbell that was constantly pinging, but that was part of the plan. We wanted a record, given how many strangers would be coming by. By 6, the cul-de-sac was busy with kids in masks over masks, costumes bulging around winter coats. It felt normal in a year that was. We had maybe a dozen groups before the rush died down. We alternated between handing out candy and letting the bowl sit unattended with a "please take one" sign. The wind kept flipping the sign, and I had to tape it down with blue painter's tape. Around 7:45 p.m., my fiancé kissed me through his mask and headed to his shift, backing our gray CRV out of the driveway with the heater blasting. I stayed on the porch in an old Penn State hoodie with a blanket draped over my legs, sipping lukewarm cider and watching the motion alerts light up my phone. That was when the last kid of the early wave came up the walkway. He wasn't with parents, which wasn't unusual for older kids, and at first glance I thought he was dressed as something from a slasher movie. The mask was cheap white plastic with hollow eyes and a cracked cheek, the kind you'd grab off a peg at Target. It was cracked clean through from the corner of the mouth toward the ear, spiderwebbed with stress lines, and I could hear his breathing through it, amplified in the quiet. He didn't say trick or treat. He just stood there still as a lamppost, holding out a limp, empty pillowcase with both hands. "Hey, happy Halloween," I said because silence felt wrong. My voice sounded too loud under the porch ceiling. I used the chute and sent a bag of mini Reese down to the table where it skittered to a stop against his shin. He didn't pick it up. He kept holding out the pillowcase, showing me the inside like it was proof of something. I reached into the bowl and sent a second bag down. He didn't take that either. Finally, he lowered the pillowcase an inch, looked down, and nudged one of the candy bags with the toe of his shoe, then turned and walked back to the sidewalk. I watched him, waiting to see which direction he'd go. He didn't join any other groups or cut across the grass like the middle schoolers always do. He just continued down the curb under the maples, slow enough that I could still hear the faint whisper of his breathing through plastic. The Ring saved a clip. I remember thinking he must be 13, maybe 14, probably doing some kind of TikTok bit where you refuse the candy for a reaction. It wasn't the first weird thing I'd seen on Halloween. By 9, the street had quieted. The porch light stayed on, and I brought the bowl inside so raccoons wouldn't scatter it. I locked the storm door and the deadbolt out of habit. Sometimes teenagers did late-night dares, and I didn't want to be the homeowner yelling from behind a window. I set the house alarm on stay, which beeped a pleasant little tone and sent a notification to my phone. I turned off the pumpkin lantern and added the last of the candy to zip-top bag. At 9:13 p.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I glanced at the live view and saw nothing right away, just the curve of our driveway and the street beyond. Then at the edge of the frame near our mailbox, something white shifted. He was standing at the sidewalk, half behind the silver mailbox post, like a kid who didn't want to cross an invisible line. The cracked mask caught the streetlight. He faced the house and didn't move for a full 30 seconds, long enough for the Ring to time out and start a second clip. I opened the front door, not all the way, just enough to lean out and call, "We're done for the night." The storm door glass reflected my living room behind me, the pumpkin on the TV stand glowing. The figure didn't respond. He lifted the pillowcase again, but the opening yawned toward me so I could see nothing inside. The whole thing gave me goosebumps, a primal feeling that this was not a kid doing a bit. My hand found the deadbolt and turned it back to locked as quietly as I could. I texted my fiancé, "Weird kid back, just standing in the street." He replied from the ambulance bay a minute later, "Lock up, call if you need." I did both, though I called the non-emergency line because it felt dramatic to call 911 over a trick-or-treater. The dispatcher took my name and address and said, "We can have a car swing by your street, ma'am, but it's Halloween. We're pretty slammed. Call back if he comes onto your property." Her voice was bored in a way that made me feel fragile. The car never came, or if it did, I missed it. At 10:41 p.m. there was another alert. He was across the street now under the taller maple where the sidewalk curves toward our neighbor's place. The maple had a low branch that kids liked to jump for. He stood under it like he was thinking of doing that and decided not to. From that distance I could tell the mask wasn't a brand name Michael Myers or anything. It looked generic but somehow older, like the white had yellowed around the edges. The crack was the same jagged line. His breathing came through the audio as a soft, steady hiss. Our neighbor directly across, Tom Kelsey, usually sat on his porch on Halloween with a Bluetooth speaker playing campfire songs. His porch light was still on, but he hadn't been out that night. He taped a "Please Take One Happy Halloween" sign to a plastic cauldron and left it on a chair. The cauldron was empty by then. The masked kid drifted closer to Tom's driveway and then back again, as if he couldn't decide what he wanted. I thought about calling Tom, then remembered I didn't have his new number. At 11:22 p.m., there was a noise like something brushing the storm door. Not a knock, more like a fingertip testing the glass. I froze in the hallway with the foyer light off, listening. The ring caught it, a pale shape in the very top left corner of the frame, then the glint of the cracked mask as he leaned into the edge of the doorbell's fisheye lens and backed away. He never pressed the button. The audio picked up 3 separate breaths, slow and controlled, like he was packing himself. I broke my no 9/11 rule. The operator asked if anyone had tried to enter. I said no, but he was right outside and I was alone and we had repeated incidents. She told me to stay away from windows and officers would drive through. I sat on the floor of the hall where the stairway makes an L, clutching my phone and hearing nothing for long minutes except the house settling and the occasional gust through the eaves. The motion alert stopped. Eventually I dozed sitting up. Something woke me at 2:14. It was a different sound than footsteps. It was the scrape of our side gate latch. The gate leads to the narrow strip of yard between our house and the privacy fence, the path to the patio, and the sliding glass door. The ring chime sounded a moment later, then the alarm's entry chime, which indicated movement near the back sensor. My heart thumped a hollow sound in my chest. I pulled up the backyard camera feed. The infrared washed the patio in gray, and for a second all I could see was our grill cover moving like a breath. Then he stepped into view, closer than he'd ever been, the cracked mask reflecting a flat ghost light. He turned his head like he was cataloging furniture. He set the pillowcase down on the patio table, and this time it slumped heavy, like it actually had something inside. He reached for the sliding door handle. The deadbolt knob gleamed in the glass, locked. He tested the door with both hands and felt the resistance, then stood still as if waiting for the door to change its mind. I was already on the phone, whispering my address. "Stay with me," the operator said. "Officers are en route." I watched him lift his right hand and with an index finger trace a small circle on the glass about the height of my head. It squeaked faintly, tinnily through the mic. He left the circle and picked up the pillowcase again. He didn't leave the yard right away. He turned, scanned the dark kitchen through the glass, and then looked straight at the camera. The crack in the mask gave him a permanent lopsided expression, like a crooked smile, though I never saw a mouth behind it. He tilted his head once, the way a dog listens, and then walked back down the path. The side gate creaked, then clicked shut by itself in the wind. The patio table was empty. Police rolled up at 2:27 a.m. They drove slowly down the cul-de-sac with their searchlights sweeping fences and parked cars. One officer walked the yard with his flashlight and wrote down my description: white plastic mask, cracked cheek, thin build, gray hoodie. "Probably an older kid pushing his luck," he said. "We'll do an extra patrol." He sounded like he believed it, but the flashlight beam lingered on the sliding door a beat longer than necessary. I didn't sleep after that. I left the porch light on until dawn, even though it made the house visible like a stage set. My fiancé got home after 6 and stood in the hall listening while I recapped it and scrolled through the clips. He didn't say much, just set the chain on the door and walked the fence line in his work boots. The pumpkin lantern never turned back on. Its battery had died, which felt like a small cosmic insult. By 8 a.m., our group text with the neighbors was buzzing. Someone asked if the police cars were for a break-in. Mrs. Patel posted a photo of the cauldron on Tom Kelsey's chair and asked if someone had moved it. It was on the porch rail now, balanced like it had been placed there carefully. Then Tom's sister, who lives 2 streets away, asked if anyone had seen him since last night. He'd missed a morning call. His car was still in the driveway. His porch light was on. The police were at his door by 9. The rest of the morning passed in a paranoid fog. An officer knocked on my door and I gave him the time-stamped clips. He watched the 9:13 and the 2:14 videos twice and asked if I could email them. He didn't tell me much, but he asked if I'd noticed anyone moving through backyards in the last week. I hadn't. I did mention the pillowcase seeming heavier, and he wrote that down without looking up, which made my stomach drop more than anything. That afternoon, after the police left, I scrolled through our app again, clip by 40-second clip, like I could find pixels that the officer had missed. At 2:22 a.m., there was a brief motion alert from across the street. Our camera sometimes caught Tom's walkway when the wind shifted the maples. The feed was grainy and angled wrong, but I could see a pale oval move past his porch railing. The porch light blew the details out, but you could make out the pillowcase slung over a shoulder. It didn't look empty anymore. It looked like how a pillowcase looks when it's full of laundry. In the early clips from the evening, when he'd come to my porch and stood without speaking, I noticed a small detail. On his right hand, the index and middle fingers were wrapped in what looked like sports tape, the kind you'd buy in a 2-pack at CVS. It made his hand look too adult for a kid. The tape was grimy, as if it had been used on more than one night. When he traced the circle on the sliding door, You could see the tape leave a tiny smudge that I didn't notice until the next day when I wiped the glass and my paper towel came away gray. The next morning, November 1st, I checked the mailbox because I couldn't make myself walk across the street where the police were still parked. Inside was a single fun-sized Snickers bar with a neat, rectangular piece of packing tape across the wrapper. Under the tape, stuck flat, was something that looked like lint at first. It was one of those little rubber bumpers that keep picture frames from tilting. Ours had been missing on the frame that hung by the door. I know because the frame had been clicking against the wall whenever we opened the door. I had looked for the bumper the day before and couldn't find it. I brought the Snickers inside using a paper towel and set it on the counter as it might stain the granite. There was no note in the mailbox, no message, just the candy and the bumper under tape. The implication sank in slowly. Someone had been inside the door long enough to pry a thumb-sized piece off a frame, or they had taken it earlier and saved it for today. The thought made me sick. The neighborhood Facebook group lit up with speculation, which I muted after 10 minutes. A patrol car did slow loops for the rest of the week. My fiancé added a second deadbolt to the back door and ordered longer screws for the strike plates. He stopped leaving for his shift 5 minutes before. He left 10 minutes early so he could circle the block and check the side streets. We put a motion light on the side gate. None of those things made the house feel like ours again. Tom didn't answer calls that week. There were no dramatic developments like you see on TV, no breaking news bulletin. His sister put up flyers and posted to next door. Police cars came less often and then not at all. The cauldron was gone from his porch by the second week, moved inside by family. The porch light got turned off. Every time I saw the empty chair through my window, I thought about the mask's crack and the way the breathing sounded like someone being careful not to fog the plastic. I never saw that mask in our yard again, but I saw it in other places, in reflections, in white ovals that were just a sign or a plastic grocery bag stuck on a fence. Twice, the ring picked up someone walking past our mailbox after midnight on random weekdays, and each time the figure's head didn't turn toward our house, but the timing still lodged under my skin. I started to sleep with earplugs so I wouldn't jump at every truck downshifting on the highway. The last detail is the one I think about when I can't sleep. 3 months after Halloween, we replaced the weather stripping on the front door. When my fiancé pulled the interior trim off, there was a tiny gap where the strike plate screws go into the framing, a space nobody ever sees, dusty and splintered. Something pale was wedged in there, folded tight. He teased it out with needle-nose pliers and set it on the foyer table. It was a corner of a piece of paper, cut from a larger sheet, with one word printed neatly in block letters: treat. The letters weren't cut from a magazine or anything dramatic. They were printed on a regular inkjet like someone typed them in Word and scaled them up. The paper didn't smell like anything. The edges were sharp, like a knife had done the cutting on a smooth surface. We never found the rest of the sheet. I put that scrap inside a Ziploc and then inside a manila envelope, and I still keep it in the drawer where we used to keep spare keys. I don't know if the mask had anything to do with Tom going missing. I don't know if the person behind it was a kid on a dare or someone older who knew exactly how much the world was looking the other way that year. I only know that the pillowcase wasn't empty the last time I saw it, and that the word under our doorframe wasn't a message for Halloween. It was a reminder. And on some nights when the house is quiet and our porch light flickers before it clicks on, I swear I hear breathing through cheap plastic, patient as ever, like he's still waiting for me to say the other word. It was the first Halloween we trusted a camera more than common sense. My wife and I had started leaving a bowl of candy on the porch the last couple years, with one of those handwritten, "Please take 2" signs that never worked. This year I wanted proof of the kid who always dumped half the bowl into his pillowcase. I figured a discreet little camera would catch a masked pirate or a teenager in a hoodie, and I could post a clip in the neighborhood Facebook group and feel righteous. I didn't expect the footage to make me feel like I shouldn't have a front door at all. I live in a split-level ranch on a quiet cul-de-sac in northern New Jersey. The houses are all some variety of beige or gray with vinyl siding, a cable line stapled along the clapboard, and a porch light that's too bright in summer and too dim in winter. Our porch is small, just 3 concrete steps, a white storm door with a hydraulic arm that hisses when it closes, and a little welcome mat with a pumpkin on it that my wife, Haley, puts out every October. The candy bowl was a cheap orange plastic thing from Party City, the kind that gets scratch marks if you stack other bowls in it. I had the camera mounted above and to the left of the door, tucked against the trim, angled down. For anyone curious, the camera was a small battery-powered one I magnet-mounted to a steel plate under the soffit. It wasn't the doorbell. This was separate from the standard doorbell camera everyone has now. I picked it because it had better night vision and a microSD slot, so I didn't have to pay extra for cloud storage. I formatted the card that afternoon, ran a test to make sure the timestamp overlay was working, and taped the "Please Take Two" sign to a little yard stake in the flower bed beside the steps. The porch light was set to a warm amber. The bowl went on a small table beside the doormat, in easy reach. Trick-or-treating started around 6:15 p.m. Little kids with parents walked up in groups and took their pieces like they always do, sometimes 3 or 4 instead of 2. I kept an eye through the sidelight window whenever I heard footsteps. I'll admit I was smug about the setup. We were going to a neighbor's fire pit later, so I wanted to have the bowl self-regulate while we were out. Between the hour-by-hour motion alerts and the doorbell cam as backup, I felt covered. We left at 7:30 p.m. The bowl was half full. Haley put a small plastic skeleton next to it, and we propped the storm door open so kids wouldn't have to fight it. It was one of those perfect fall nights, cold enough for your breath to show, leaves scuffing the sidewalk, and a smell of wood smoke from somewhere down the block. We walked to the cul-de-sac circle where our neighbors had set up a solo stove. I checked my phone a couple times when it buzzed with person-detected notifications, laughed at a boy trying to juggle 3 full-size bars, and then pocketed it. We came back at 9:45 p.m. The sidewalks were emptying, and the bowl on our porch was almost empty. There were more wrappers than I remembered around the table, like somebody had opened a few on the spot and left the trash. I figured that checked out. Teenagers always show up later and do that. We closed the storm door, brought the bowl in, and dropped the leftover candy into a zip-top bag. I took down the sign and stacked the skeleton in the hall closet. It felt like a successful experiment. I didn't look at the footage until the next morning. I had coffee and a bagel in front of my laptop at the kitchen table, and I popped the microSD card in like I was about to watch a highlight reel. The clips were in 2-minute segments, each time a motion event triggered. The first hour was exactly what you'd expect: tiny witches, a kid in a dinosaur costume, and parents waiting down on the sidewalk holding travel mugs. Every clip was stamped with a little white 2023 1031, and times like 1832, 11 and 1834, 45 in the corner. At 8:14 p.m. something changed. The 2-minute clip began, and for the first 3 seconds it looked normal: the porch lit amber, the table, the bowl. Then the image collapsed into rolling bands of gray and black, like an old TV switching off. Horizontal lines dragged down the frame, and a sound like a detuned radio swept through the audio. It wasn't just static, it rose and fell like a breath through a harmonica. For the rest of the 2 minutes, it was all that: blizzard noise and a slow, wet, metallic sort of clicking, as if someone was tapping a coin against the camera housing. The next clip started at 8:16:01. The static bled away and the image came back. The bowl had fewer pieces in it. I went back and forth a few times. 8:14, nothing but static and that weird clicking. 8:16, the bowl lighter. I checked the doorbell camera app for the same time. The doorbell camera did record at 8:14. It had 12 seconds of utterly empty porch and the quiet street beyond, like the lens was looking past the house and the house wasn't there. I don't even know how to describe it better. It hurt my brain. The porch itself was somehow less present, and everything was too crisp past it. I told myself it was Wi-Fi interference. I remembered reading something about ham radios making electronics go crazy. I kept going. At 8:21 there was another clip with static. This time the rolling bands weren't uniform. They kept resolving into something darker in the center of the frame, like a stain that almost had a shape. If I paused and went forward frame by frame on my laptop, about 1 second in, the banding formed a silhouette. Not a person exactly, but a gap in the noise where a person-shaped absence would be. Shoulders, a head too smooth to be a face. The clicking on the audio track sped up for 2 seconds, then fell into that breath-like swish again. From 8:23 to 9:05, trick-or-treaters kept coming. Normal clips alternated with static clips. Whenever a static clip happened in the sequence, the next normal one would show fewer pieces in the bowl, and there wouldn't be a single human on camera taking them. The doorbell camera, if it had a clip at all, showed the porch empty, sometimes with the street oddly sharpened, headlights passing farther down than usual, and sound thin like it was filtered. It was subtle, and I hated that it was subtle. I wanted a glitch that made sense. At 9:37 p.m., the last weird clip of the night triggered. This is the one that made me mute my laptop for a minute and just breathe. The static came in like a wave. The gray banding boiled up from the bottom, not the top. The sound on the audio track wasn't just a swish, it was like numbers half-whispered under the static. The only ones I could make out playing it back 3 times were 2 and trick, like a kid reminding himself of the sign. Then at 01:14 into the 2-minute clip, the silhouette in the noise laned. I say lane because the darker patch seemed to bend toward the camera and the bands brightened around where a face would be, and for one frame the white timestamp digits warped like something was inches from the lens. When it cut to the 9:39 clip, the bowl was nearly empty, and a single Milky Way was on the doormat, partly unwrapped. I called the non-emergency line because calling 911 to report static felt ridiculous. When the officer arrived, I explained the weird recordings, and he watched one clip and hummed. He said, honestly, could be RF interference. We see it with older baby monitors, garage door openers, that kind of thing. He glanced around our porch, checked the lock, and told me to keep the candy inside next year. He was polite, but the vibe was shrug. Haley said something about teenagers with a jammer, and he nodded, and then he was gone. That would have been the end of it if the house hadn't started making the same noise at night. The first time it was 2:14 a.m. the night after Halloween. I woke up because the sound in my dream leaned into real life, a swish like a coat sleeve brushing a wall, then a slow, rhythmic clicking somewhere near the front of the house. I lay there listening, half asleep, and picked up my phone to check the doorbell app. The timeline had a motion event at 2:13:52. I tapped it. The 15-second clip was the most nothing video I've ever seen. The porch and steps, perfectly still, perfectly framed, with that weird overcrisp street beyond, like the camera had a new prescription. I went downstairs in bare feet and stood by the front door listening. The clicking was faint. When I put my fingers on the storm door's handle, it stopped. The house settled in that collective sigh old houses do, and I ended up just locking the deadbolt, double-checking windows, and going back to bed. It felt like a night sound you convince yourself you didn't hear. 2 nights later at 2:14 a.m. again it happened. Haley was at her parents' place for the weekend, so I was alone. The swish was louder now, like someone slowly dragging their hand across a microphone. The clicking traced the wall near the foyer, a metronome. I turned on the hallway light and for some reason turned on the TV in the living room just for noise. It was paused on Netflix, a selection screen. As soon as the TV warmed up, my phone buzzed with a doorbell motion alert. There was no clip to play. It said, "Event cannot be viewed." That's never happened before. The TV, meanwhile, cut to a gray screen, not my streaming input, not a no-signal screen. A plain gray with a top-to-bottom roll and a hiss that matched what I'd heard on the porch video. The sound wasn't coming from the TV's speakers. It was deeper in the room itself, like the air was dialed to static. I turned the TV off, and it kept going for 3 seconds. That night I set the little porch camera inside, facing the front door through the glass of the storm door. I didn't want to be outside with whatever made the camera act like that, but I wanted proof. I angled it so the bowl, which was now on the hallway table as a catch-all for keys and mail, was in frame in the bottom right corner. I put a fresh card in and hit record. Then I went into the kitchen and sat at the table with a hoodie on, laptop open to the camera feed. 2:11 a.m. the video paused itself for a half second and returned. No static, just a small jump. At 2:13:18 the porch light faintly flickered like there was a brownout. The timer on the camera overlay kept counting smoothly, which means the power was fine. At 2:13:46 the audio bloomed, there's no other word for it, into a layered sound of whispering wind and that moth-on-glass clicking. The clicking wasn't random. It would do 5 taps, a breath, 2 taps, then 5 again. When it matched 525 for the 3rd time, the candy bowl on the hallway table shifted. I don't want to exaggerate, it didn't fly and it didn't slide dramatically. It ticked. The bowl ticked against the wood as if someone had bumped the table by an inch. Keys inside clinked. The camera's mic captured it. I stared at the live feed and then at the actual bowl in the doorway, a real thing in the corner of my eye that had just moved without anyone touching it. When I stood, the porch camera feed collapsed into static. The frame formed at darker center again, like an absence, but this time the absence was not outside. The bands were stronger in the lower right where the bowl sat in frame, as if the static itself was bending toward it. I didn't hear footsteps in the house, that's important. I didn't hear anything like a person moving, but I heard breathing. Not mine, I was holding it, and not the house, not the heat clicking on. The mic must have been doing something weird amplifying, but the breathing sounded like it was inches from the lens. Long and slow, then shorter, like the camera made the thing breathe differently. The bowl ticked again just once, and a key slid to the edge of it and hung there. I called 911. It felt stupid and necessary at the same time. I said I thought someone was in my house and also that my camera was doing something I couldn't explain. The dispatcher told me to wait in a room with the door locked if possible. I stood in the kitchen with a chef's knife on the island and locked the back door. The static in the living room was loud enough that the kitchen seemed quieter by comparison. Then above it I heard a word, if it was a word. A mouth shape trying to say trick without a tongue. When the officers finally arrived, they cleared the house with flashlights and told me everything looked normal. The storm door lock was fine, there was no forced entry. They checked the basement and the attic hatch quickly, the way people check these things when they don't think anything is wrong. One of them stood in my living room, looked at the candy bowl on the hallway table and said, "Are you sure you're not just hearing the fridge cycle?" I said yes, I was sure. They left me with a case number and a look that said I needed sleep. Next morning I played back the camera card from inside. I scrubbed the timeline to 02:14:00 and let it roll. The house was quiet in the video like it never is in the moment. None of the little pops and creaks came through. The static ate the frame as expected, but the way it moved wasn't like before. It wasn't random. The banding drew toward the bowl like silt pulled by a current. At 02:14:11 exactly, the dark absence leaned in from the left edge of the frame. Not a human line, a fold, like a page turning, revealing more dark underneath. The overlay timestamp bowed for a frame. When it snapped back, the bowl was not on the table anymore. It was in the doorway, centered in the bottom of the frame, and I hadn't seen it move. I stood up from the laptop so fast the chair tipped. The real bowl was back on the table, right there. I checked the front mat to make sure I hadn't somehow carried it to the doorway and forgotten. Nothing, just my keys and a pen in the bowl, and the table had a faint ring of moisture under the plastic, like it had been there all night. In the video, though, the bowl sat in the doorway until 02:15:03, then the clip ended. The next 2-minute segment started with a clean frame and the bowl back on the table, like the video itself had decided to be sane again. I posted a shortened version of the porch footage, the 8:14 and 9:37 clips, nothing from inside, in the neighborhood group asking if anyone had seen interference like that. A guy a few streets over older said he used to get static like that when a delivery truck with a giant CB antenna parked near his house. A woman said her doorbell captured weirdly clear distant audio of a car accident at the main road, but nothing on the street directly in front of her house. Someone else asked if I had a ham radio neighbor. Nobody mentioned the bowl. Haley didn't want to hear it. She made the face she makes when I tell her true crime facts before bed and said she'd rather I not show her the inside clips. We agreed to put the bowl away in the basement and to turn off the porch camera for a while. I put the bowl in a box of Christmas stuff because that felt emotionally correct, decorate the fear with tinsel and drown it in other things. That night, without the camera running, I slept. I didn't check the doorbell app once. 2 nights later, the doorbell sent me a 2:14 a.m. alert again out of habit. I didn't want to look, but curiosity wins. I tapped the notification with my thumb half covering the screen like I was squinting. The clip was 4 seconds long. The porch was empty, no freeze frame. The bowl from the basement was on the top step, centered like I'd carefully placed it there. The amber porch light washed it out, but I could tell from the little scratch on the rim where I'd stacked it with other bowls. I went to the door with the worst sense of deja vu I've ever had. The storm door hissed when I opened it. The step was bare. No bowl, no scuff marks, no damp ring from cold plastic on warmer concrete. I closed the door and it thudded like a heartbeat. In the dead quiet of the house, before the HVAC caught up, I heard a single click from the hallway table. Not a shifting key, a tap on the plastic. I didn't go to the basement right away. I didn't go at all that day. At lunch, I texted my friend Dan, who does AV installation, and asked if I could bring him some strange files. He said sure. I brought the SD card to his shop, and he put the clips on a big monitor, fiddled with sliders, and tried a dainterlace filter even though it wasn't interlaced. He slowed it way down and scrubbed back and forth. At one point, he shot me a look. He probably thought I didn't notice. Like he was deciding whether to make a joke. He didn't. Dan told me something I can't stop thinking about. He said the banding in the static looked like what happens when a lens focuses on something too close to see. Like you're trying to focus on your own eyelid, he said. I asked what could be that close to the lens, and he shrugged. Then he pointed to the corner where the timestamp warped and said, That's the sensor voltage dipping for a frame. That's not a network thing. That's at the camera. On the way out, he handed me a USB drive with the slowed clips and said, Don't show this to your wife unless she really wants to see it. I've had people suggest animals, ask if I had raccoons, and ask if the clicking was a bug in the camera housing. I've opened the camera. There's nothing in it. The doorbell caught non-events twice more at 2:14 a.m. 4 seconds of the porch with the bowl centered on the top step, then nothing when I looked in real life. The storm door hinge began to make a faint noise I can only describe as a whisper that wasn't a squeak. It's probably just cold weather, but it whispers when I walk past and doesn't when Haley does. The basement seemed fine when I finally went down and opened the Christmas box. The bowl was right where I'd left it, tucked under a tangled string of old incandescent lights. There were faint marks on the inside of the bowl I couldn't decide if I'd seen before. 3 little scuffs in a row, a space, then 2, 5-2 again. I brought it upstairs because leaving it down there felt like pretending you don't hear someone calling your name. I set it on the kitchen island and went back to work. My phone buzzed at 2:14 p.m. that day, broad daylight with a doorbell alert. I let it go. I don't expect anyone to believe any of this. It would be easier for me not to. But every Halloween since, when I carve the pumpkins for the front steps, the camera sits in a drawer and the candy stays inside, and at 2:14 a.m. that week a sound like a detuned radio passes through the living room. Whenever I put keys in the bowl on the table, one will migrate to the edge on its own before morning, like the weight of the night pulls it there. And most nights, if I open the TV menu and flip to the HDMI input where the porch camera used to live, for one frame, just one gray band's roll from bottom to top, and the timestamp overlay from last year's Halloween at 9, 12:37 p.m. flash warps as if something inches away from the lens is still leaning in. I stopped watching the clips Danny gave me after he texted me. I don't think that's static, man. I asked what he meant and he said, listen with good headphones. The noise has a pattern. It sounds like breath. I didn't put on the headphones. When I put the bowl back in the basement, I pressed the plastic down into ribbon and tinsel until the rim bent, and I still heard a soft tick from upstairs as if it moved anyway. The last time I checked the doorbell at 2:14 a.m., the 4-second clip of the porch opened on the empty step, and for one frame at the end, the camera caught the inside of my living room instead, an angle from above that I don't have, and the bowl was sitting on the hallway table, centered perfectly, like it had been waiting there all along. I didn't save that clip. I don't want to know if it saves itself. The maze wasn't supposed to talk back, but the first time it said my name, clear as if someone's lips were an inch from my ear, I realized how loud a whisper can sound when you do know where it came from. This happened last October in central Illinois, on the kind of cold fall night that makes your breath look like smoke. I was 22 and living with my best friend Bry in a 2-bedroom apartment above a hair salon. The plan had started as a joke at a tailgate, half a dozen of us talking about the legendary Harvest Ridge corn maze that drew lines of families all month. Someone said we should sneak in after closing and do it in the dark, like make our own haunted maze. By the time the sun went down, the group had shrunk to 4. Me, Bry, her boyfriend Nate, and our friend Eric, who had a trunk full of cheap beer and mini bottles of Fireball. Harvest Ridge wasn't far, just past a long stretch of soybean fields, a Dollar General, and a church with a light-up sign that said Fall Festival this weekend. We parked on the shoulder to avoid the cameras by the main lot and walked the last quarter mile under those weak orange streetlights that make everything look old. The farm had shut down an hour earlier, but you could still smell the fryer oil and kettle corn in the air. The light towers were off. The generator hum was gone. The maze itself was a black wall, maybe 8 feet tall, with the narrow entrance marked by a plywood arch squeezed between bales of hay. Getting in was embarrassingly easy. The chain-link side gate had a padlock, but someone had cut a corner of the fence where it met a wooden fence post. We slid through, laughing way too loud, trying not to catch our jackets on the sharp wire. Inside the fence, the ground turned to hard-packed dirt. Corn stalks flanked both sides of the path like a narrow canyon, leaves rattling in the breeze. There were still plastic pumpkins zip-tied to the posts from earlier, and a faded sign that said no running, no climbing, no cutting through. It felt like we'd climbed into a giant ribcage. We did what drunk people do, pretended we weren't drunk. Eric held out a mini bottle. Courage shot, he said. I tapped the plastic with my finger and said I was fine, but I did sip from my beer. Bry set a timer on her phone, 30 minutes, she said. Then we bail if it sucks, and we stepped into the first corridor. Our phone flashlights cut thin cones into the dark, lighting up dust motes and the white veins on the corn leaves. The ground was cracked but slick with a thin layer of powder. You could see other people's footprints from the day. Quiet in a way that made you feel like you were being listened to. Not just the regular quiet of night, but a kind of absorbed quiet, like the corn was taking in what we said. We joked about bringing a machete like in a movie. We did the stay to the left thing and pretended like it was a strategy. The maze had occasional signposts with little jokes and Bible verses and arrows that said you're almost there, which were obviously lies. Twice we came to a wooden footbridge that went over another path. From the top, the corn looked like an ocean frozen in mid-wave, silver at the edges where the moon hit it. We were maybe 10 minutes in when we heard the first voice, my name, said in a low, steady whisper, Madison. I stopped hard and spun around. Bry bumped into me and laughed, then saw my face and shut up. Nate turned his light over my shoulder, then stepped to the side to light the row behind us. It was just the rigid curtain of stalks. The sound hadn't come from behind exactly, though. It wasn't anywhere. It was like I'd felt it on the side of my neck. Eric grinned and said my name in a mocking way to show it had to be him, but it didn't sound the same. The one I'd heard felt colder. We stood still for a few seconds. Corn leaves scratched each other in the wind like someone rubbing paper together. Probably the highway, Nate said, even though you couldn't hear any traffic. We kept moving. It wasn't a scream that got me to pick up my pace, just a small sound, something like a knuckle rapping wood, but it came from inside the row to our right. I moved my light into the leaves and saw nothing but the seams of pale husks and those knuckles of broken stalk. Eric said, it's deer, which makes no sense because deer don't knock on things. Then came Bry's voice, only it was Bry. I was in front, and from up ahead, maybe 10 yards, I heard her say, Mads, wait up. I turned to look at her beside me, her flashlight tilted into the dirt, illuminating her shoes. She heard it too. We both froze. Okay, funny, she said to nobody in particular. We listened, not moving. The phone timer buzzed in her pocket. We're at 12 minutes, she said automatically, then winced at hearing her voice in that place. I tried to laugh. We probably passed some teenagers hiding in the rows, I said. That felt better to say out loud, like we were stating a rule about the world. Teenagers hiding in the rows is a thing that exists. We reached a small dead-end loop with a hay bale bench and a laminated sign tacked to a post that said, "You survived the slasher. Take a selfie." There was fake blood spattered on the post and some shredded flannel on the ground. Someone had drawn a smiley face in black marker on the sign, then scribbled it out so the smile was a dark, dented hole. Eric sat on the bale and took a selfie anyway, and the flash exploded too bright in the dark, making the path beyond the sign look like a stage set. The picture caught dust, our eyes red, and something else. That was my first thought, seeing the thumbnail. But he tucked his phone away before I could look again. At 11:48 p.m., Bry's phone lost service. Mine dropped to 1 bar. The map she'd pulled up before we went in turned into a blank grid with a blue dot that didn't move even when we did. "This is how people die," she said in that joking voice you use to make your fear sound like personality. Nate tapped his pocket. "I've got a Swiss Army knife," he said. "Worst case, we cut straight through." We looked at the sign again. No cutting through. The rule didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like the maze needed us to obey it. We turned left and then left again and came to a wooden platform with a short set of stairs to an observation deck. The boards creaked like a ship as we climbed. From the top you couldn't see the house lights of the farm, only a dim silhouette of the barn cupola against the sky. The corn whispered constantly in the small wind, but underneath that there was another sound. The closest thing I can compare it to is when people whisper at church, all at once and soft and close, a kind of blanket of mouth sounds and breath sounds that your brain tries to sort into words and can't. Eric cupped his hands to his mouth and yelled, "Hello." The whispering paused. In that half-second of quiet from right at the base of the platform stairs, a voice said, "Eric," not loud, not even spooky, just like a friend trying not to wake someone. He stumbled back and rattled the railing with his hip. We came down the steps fast. We tried to make jokes after that, but our words didn't go anywhere. They died in the rows like moths hitting a screen. We took turns leading. We started leaving little markers, an empty fireball bottle placed at a fork, a hair tie looped around a brittle stem, a dollar bill wedged under a rock. 20 minutes later, we came to a fork that had those things already there. The bottle was standing upright, cap off, and the dollar bill had been folded into a narrow strip and tucked into the mouth of the bottle like a flag. At 12:06 a.m., I heard my mother's voice. She's the kind of mom who says my whole name when she's upset, "Mad-Eye son," but this wasn't that. It was the voice she uses when she's trying to find me in a crowded store. Soft, slightly raised at the end like a question. "Peanut," she said, and the nickname hit some muscle memory inside me that made my knees weak. Bry grabbed my forearm hard enough to make me say her name out loud like a warning. "Okay, stop," she said, to the air, to the corn, to whatever stupid speaker someone had hidden out there. "Stop." That was the moment we decided to cut through. The left-hand rule wasn't working. The signs were nonsense. It felt like we were walking past the same small patches of dirt over and over. So Nate took out the Swiss Army knife, flipped out the tiny saw, and pushed on a stalk. It didn't budge. He sawed at the husk, and the knife blade snapped off at the hinge. For some reason, that made it real in a way the voices hadn't. The corn wouldn't let us. We stood breathing for a second. My breath came out shaky, even though I wasn't cold. We took the next path and came upon a staff-only emergency gate, 2 posts with a sheet of plywood on hinges and a chain looped around it, padlocked. Through the slats we could see a service lane, a low fence, and beyond that the pale gravel of the parking lot catching the moon. For a second, just seeing the world beyond made me feel normal again. Then from the other side of the gate, a whisper. "Don't," it said, like an intimate secret. All 4 of us jumped back the same way you flinch when a dog lunges at a fence you thought was solid. We worked our way along the inside of the emergency fence, hopping to find a corner or a gap. The ground here was more compacted, and there were enough boot prints that it felt like people had walked this path earlier. We passed a scarecrow on a post, just jeans and a hoodie and a burlap head with button eyes. The hoodie had the farm's logo on the chest. The left sleeve was rolled to the elbow, like whoever had dressed it got distracted halfway through. The scarecrow's head faced towards the fence. When we passed it, I looked back without meaning to, and it was still facing the fence. I told myself it only felt like it turned. At 12:14 a.m. we came to a T-intersection and Eric wasn't with us. We hadn't heard him fall or branch off or answer a text. He had a habit of stopping to pee without announcing it, so the first thing we did was call his name in that irritated way people do when they're trying to sound like they aren't scared. Bry called, Nate called, I called. We listened for footsteps, for that thud in the dirt when someone tries to run. Nothing. We retraced our steps and passed the scarecrow again. The rolled sleeve was pushed up a little higher. I know that sounds like the kind of detail people add later to make a story vivid. I paid attention to it because it looked like my hoodie, a heather gray pullover with that same kangaroo pocket. I imagined someone standing there in the afternoon sun dressing a scarecrow, feeling bored and hot, pushing the sleeve up their forearm. My mind preferred that picture. When we reached the emergency gate again, there was something new slid under the bottom where the dirt had been scuffed out. It was a paper wristband like the ones they put on you at the ticket booth. The color this year was neon orange. The one on the ground was that color, but sun-bleached, old. We argued about calling 911, and by argued, I mean we said the reasons we didn't want it was proof that we should. Trespassing, drunk. The farm owner would be mad. In the end we called anyway. Bry's phone had one bar, it rang long. When the operator answered, the call stayed connected for maybe 4 seconds, long enough for me to say, "We're in the Harvest Ridge corn maze and we're lost and our friend is missing," and then it dropped. The call log said 12:21:8. That was when the maze started doing something I still can't explain without sounding like I'm explaining it wrong. We walked forward and came to a fork where we'd left the empty bottle. Only the bottle cap was back on. We went left. The path narrowed to a squeeze and came out by the footbridge. We crossed. On the other side, our footprints in the dust had been swept. The floor was clean, like someone had run a broom across it. It felt like stepping onto a stage that had been reset. Somewhere behind us, in my own voice, in my exact tone, I heard myself say, "We should go back." I don't remember choosing to run. I remember the feeling of my shoes slipping on powder and my lungs grabbing cold air and the corn whipping my shoulders. I turned right and then right again because I could hear Nate's steps to my left, and I've always had this dumb idea that you can zig when danger zags. I turned into a narrow chute that closed around me and took 5 steps before I realized it was a dead end. When I spun, my light hit something in the corner. Eric's black hoodie caught on a broken stalk. The sleeve turned inside out like it had been yanked. There was a smear on the fabric like dust and something darker at the edge. I grabbed it without thinking. It was still warm. Nate and Bry found me crouched with the hoodie in my hands like a kid holding a security blanket. We said his name together. We kept saying it. It didn't feel like calling for a person anymore. It felt like keeping ourselves moving. We did another loop and another and came upon a place where the path widened and the ground dropped slightly, and you could tell by the smell that this was where the farm had put a fog machine earlier in the night. The smell of glycerin was thin in the air like lingering perfume. There were footprints everywhere, most little kid sizes. Over those, fresh prints, ours, and layered on top, a set of prints going the other direction, heel to toe, too long between strides to be a kid and oddly narrow, like the bottom of the shoe hadn't made full contact with the ground. At 12:29 a.m. we saw light, not our lights, white light, steady, coming around a corner ahead. We sprinted toward it and nearly collided with a chain link. It was another emergency gate with a padlock, and behind it a maintenance cart with a mounted work light humming. The cart keys hung from a lanyard looped on a peg. There was nobody there. The light threw our shadows backward in a hard cutout. My shadow's head looked wrong on the dirt, like there was a second outline behind it, a fraction of a second out of sync. That could have been anything, 2 light sources, wind, or the fact that I was shaking. Then, from directly behind me, exactly matching the distance between my neck and my own mouth, I heard, "Peanut." I shouldn't have done it, but I screamed. I grabbed the chain, pulled, and shook it so hard the links rattled like coins. The padlock held. The whisper came again, that same volume, like someone practicing being soft. "Don't." It wasn't warning, it was possession, like the word belonged to me. We ran. We didn't stay to check if a person was there. We didn't wait to hear if Eric answered from the next row. We ran until our legs felt like they were filled with rubber cement and came out into a wider lane that had tire marks on it and one of those tall, yellow-painted posts in concrete that keeps a pickup from backing into a fence. The post had a sticker on it with a QR code and text that said, "Share your pic with HARVSTRIDG." Below the sticker, someone had scratched a date into the paint with a key, 10/12. That was 11 days before. We followed the lane and found another gate, and this time the chain had been looped through but not locked. We slid it off and pushed through into the service yard behind the barn. The difference between being in the maze and out of it felt physical, like stepping out of water. My ears popped. Without agreeing, we went straight to the parking lot and kept walking until we reached our car. It was 12:41 a.m. according to the dash clock. I dialed Eric. His phone went to voicemail after 1 ring. We sat in the car with the engine on and the heat blowing on our faces, not looking at each other, because the moment we made eye contact, we'd have to decide what we were about to do. We went back, of course we did. We drove the 50 yards to the farm lot like we were paying customers, pulled in under a dead light pole, and called 911 again. This time I connected. The operator transferred me to the county sheriff. I told them where we were and that our friend was missing inside the maze and that we had trespassed and that we were sorry and that we needed help. The dispatcher asked for a description and told us to stay in the parking lot. We stood there in the dry crunch of gravel, steam coming out of our mouths. Across the yard, the corn maze rose up like a building without windows. 2 deputies pulled in 10 minutes later, no lights or siren. One was older with a buzz cut, the other younger and tired looking. They didn't make us get on the ground or anything. I think they took one look at our faces and made a calculation. The older one said, "You're not the first ones to do this," in a way that didn't feel comforting. They called the owner, who showed up in work boots and a Carhartt jacket and keys that jangled. The four of them went in with flashlights and radios, while we waited against the hood of our car and tried not to say the worst things. At 1:28 a.m., they came back with Eric. He wasn't messy or bloody, he wasn't even out of breath. He looked like he'd walked out of a mall. His hoodie was still on his body, the sleeves down. His hair looked normal. He rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands and blinked at the lights in the lot like he'd just woken up. "Where were you?" Bry asked, not running to hug him, not touching him at all. He shrugged. "I was following you," he said. "You kept going around corners right when I got to them." The owner folded his arms. "We didn't see you on the cameras after midnight," he said. "We've got thermal on the perimeter and 2 GoPros in the tower. I saw these 3 moving around. I didn't see you." The younger deputy looked at me and said, "Have you been drinking?" And I said yes, because lying felt like a way to make whatever had happened my fault. They took our information and said we'd be hearing from the owner regarding trespassing, but they didn't cuff us. The older deputy said, "I'd suggest you head home and sleep." Sleep sounded like a word from another language. We got in the car and drove back toward town. Eric sat in the front with me and kept checking his phone like there were messages to return. "I swear," he said, "I was behind you the whole time. I heard you say my name like you were mad, and I was trying to catch up." I told him none of us had said his name in anger, and he nodded like he'd expected me to say that. I slept at Bry that night. We pushed her dresser in front of the bedroom door and left the TV on with the volume down low. The apartment smelled like hairspray from the salon below. Every time a car passed outside, its headlight swept a stripe across the ceiling, and I flinched like it was a hand. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. There was no call, no text, just the haptic buzz and the screen lighting my face. The battery indicator dropped from 33% to 19% while I watched it without touching anything. I put the phone face down and listened to Bry breathing through her open mouth. The farm owner called the next afternoon. He said he'd reviewed the footage and audio to get the full picture and wanted us to come out to talk about paying for the damaged fence. We went because I needed to see the normal version of the place in the daylight. The lot was full of SUVs with pumpkin stickers. Kids were eating funnel cake and wiping sugar on their shirts. A guy in a pirate costume was directing people to the hayride line with a bright orange baton. It was a completely different universe, or more accurately, we were. In the office, the owner had a flat screen with a bank of camera feeds. He scrubbed through a timeline from the night before and showed us our dumb entrance at 11:20 p.m., a sliding through the cut fence like we were in a tutorial on how to be stupid. He showed us the footbridge camera, which was mounted high on a pole. At 12:03 a.m., you could see us climbing the steps and then coming back down, 4 shapes moving like chess pieces. The sound, recorded on a single cheap mic up there, was almost all wind. Almost. He turned it up and we all heard it, approached but not captured, a whisper in the dead air between the gusts. I didn't understand it. Then the owner rewound and played it again, and this time I did. "Peanut," it said, and even on a bad mic, even buried, even barely there, it was my mother's voice. Eric pointed at the screen and said, "See, I'm right there." He touched the shape that was Nate. He touched the shape that was me. He touched the empty space behind us and said, "I was right there." The owner looked at him without smiling. "You weren't," he said. "Either the cameras missed you or you were." We offered to pay for the fence. He said to go home and think about whether we really wanted to make this a legal thing. The way he said it, I couldn't tell if he was being kind or if there was another reason. It's been almost a year. We don't talk about it with new friends. Eric moved to a new apartment across town in February and doesn't come to our place much anymore. When I see him, he's fine, he's normal, he's exactly himself. Except sometimes, when he's turning toward me from across a room or when he starts to say my name, it looks and sounds like he's a fraction of a second late, like someone is operating a switch. It's subtle enough that I could blame sleep or stress, or the fact that we stare at screens too much. 2 weeks after the maze, I was at my parents' house for Sunday dinner. My mom was slicing an apple at the kitchen counter and talking about which niece wanted which costume for Halloween. My dad was on the couch with a game on mute. Their house sits on a little plot of land backed by a line of trees, and beyond that more corn. It's not even Harvest Ridge's field. It belongs to a different farm, flat and ordinary and boring and full of grasshoppers. I carried a bag of trash out to the bin and stood on the back step for a second, because the air smelled like leaves and wood smoke in my childhood. In the gap between 2 gusts of wind, the corn quieted. From somewhere out in those rows, so softly I could almost pretend I made it up, I heard my mother's voice say, "Peanut." I went back inside and closed the door like I was keeping the heat in. I didn't tell anyone. I pretended I just remembered something and took out my phone, then put it away. That night when I lay down in my old bedroom, a notification popped up on my screen from the voice memo app. I don't use voice memos. I tapped it anyway. The title was just a date and time, 12:29 a.m. The length said 0000. I pressed play and held the phone to my ear. For a full second, the file was silent, and then right at the cut, there was a sound like breath parting the smallest space and a whisper, not my mom's voice this time. Mine. Don't, it said, but I couldn't tell if it was warning me or agreeing. I deleted the file and then I checked the recently deleted folder and deleted it again. It didn't help. A week later, the app had a new file with the same date and time, same title, same length. I didn't play that one. I turned my phone off and unplugged it from the charger and set it face down in my sock drawer. When I woke up, the battery had dropped 20%. People have told me the maze thing could have been a prank with hidden speakers or a suggestion loop where we tricked ourselves into hearing what we feared. They're probably right about some of it. But every now and then I'll be crossing a street or standing in line at the grocery store, and someone behind me will say a name, Sarah or Jake or James, and I'll feel the sound not in my ears but against my neck, like the softness of a word is something you wear. I'll turn and there's just a person on their phone, not even thinking about me, and for half a second I won't know which way to run. When I do talk about that night, I leave out the last thing. It doesn't add anything, and I don't like the way it makes people look at me. A month after Harvest Ridge, I went back to my camera roll to finally delete the selfie Eric had taken at the "You Survived the Slasher" sign. I found it easily, his arm outstretched, the flash too bright, our faces washed out and stupid like we were pretending we were brave. There are 4 of us in the frame. But if you zoom in just above our shoulders, the dust lit up by the flash doesn't look like dust. It looks like breath hanging in the air. You can see where it swirls away as if someone stepped back out of the shot. You can see the shape of a mouth in it. You can see that it's open, like it's about to say my name. I didn't save the picture, I didn't upload it anywhere, I didn't send it to anyone. But sometimes at 12:29 a.m., when I'm careful enough to be quiet, I can hear the horn again, even though I live 2 blocks from a pizza place and a gym. It's the hush right before someone says the thing they aren't supposed to. It's the space a whisper needs. And lately, when my phone buzzes in the dark with no call and no message, I don't pick it up. Because I'm afraid that this time, when I press play, the voice won't be outside the maze at all. It'll be right here with me, answering back. It was the first Halloween where I told myself I was too old to be scared. I was 22, finishing my last semester at a state college in Pennsylvania, and I figured a crowd would keep anything bad at bay. You know how it is, music, masks, a bonfire in the woods, and a Google pin dropped in a private story that vanishes after 24 hours. Safety in numbers, right? I didn't realize until that night that a crowd can make you feel more alone than being by yourself. I'm Liam, and this was October of last year, Halloween weekend. The party wasn't hosted by anyone we knew. It was one of those whispers that bounce around campus until somebody posts coordinates on a throwaway account. No flyers, no name, just a pin and a caption that said "Midnight, come masked, no cops." I had 2 friends with me, Evan and Maya, both juniors. We headed out in my Subaru around 10:30 p.m., a cooler wedged behind our seats and a cheap Bluetooth speaker rattling in the door pocket. The pin led us to State Forest 20 minutes from town, where the paved road turned into a narrow strip of gravel swallowed by tall pines. The deeper we drove, the more cars we saw tucked along the shoulder, beat-up Civics, a lifted F-150, and a couple of Outbacks like mine, fog steaming off their hoods. You could hear bass thumping before you saw the clearing, a low repeating pulse like a heartbeat under the trees. Someone had strung cafe-style lights between 2 birches, and a generator sat near a fire pit made of stones. The clearing was full of masked people in costume, half-done thrift store get-ups, last-minute Amazon wigs, and the occasional overachiever in a full suit. It looked like 100 strangers had agreed to be faceless for a night. The first thing I noticed was the plague doctor. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with a long black coat that swept the leaves and a mask with a curved beak that caught the firelight. He stood at the edge of the clearing where the light thinned into dark, gloved hands folded on a thin cane. He didn't dance, didn't drink, and didn't even move. If he turned his head at all, it was the careful tilt of a bird studying something it doesn't trust. We blended into the noise easily. Maya had a cheap velvet mask with sequins that left glitter on everyone she hugged, and Evan had a slasher mask from Spirit Halloween that made him look perpetually surprised. I wore a plain black half mask and a hoodie. The playlist was all the obvious Halloween staples, chopped with Jersey Club tracks somebody kept restarting halfway through. People were yelling over the music about nothing real, classes, roommates, the bartender at the den, just strangers being loud enough to make you feel normal. At 11:40 p.m., as I checked my phone for service, I noticed the account that posted the coordinates was gone. The story of where the pin had been was also gone. When I tapped the handle, Instagram just flashed, user not found. That should have been the first point where I said something, but I told myself it made sense for a throwaway account. Still, I screenshotted the location in case we needed a ride or someone got lost. The timestamp on that screenshot, which I'd look at later, would mess with me. 11:58 p.m., locked like a stuck clock. The plague doctor didn't mix with anyone. He existed at the perimeter, always one step beyond the last arc of the string lights. Every time I turned my head, he seemed to be the same exact distance away, like the clearing was a stage and he was the usher making sure no one stepped off it. Once, a girl in a red devil getup stumbled too close to him and laughed, boo, like she expected a jump. He didn't flinch, he just lifted a hand like he was adjusting the edge of his mask, and the girl sort of drifted away from him without saying anything else. Around midnight, the generator stuttered and the lights dimmed. The music crackled, someone kicked the speaker by accident, and a cluster of people held up their phones like lighters to fill the gap. The playlist resumed a second later with the same song as before, like we'd rewound to the top without anyone pressing a button. I checked my phone again, no bars, which wasn't surprising out here. What was surprising was the time, 12:08 a.m., then 12:08 a.m. again when I checked a minute later, and again after that. Maybe my clock was lagging. I shrugged it off, slid the phone back in my pocket, and took a sip of warm beer. At 12:14 a.m., I remember because I checked the time again, someone took a picture of me without asking. A flash popped in my face from about 10 feet away, blinding me for a second, and when my eyes cleared, the plague doctor's beak was framed in the afterimage like it had been right in front of me. I blinked. The photographer wasn't there, and neither was the plague doctor. He was back at the line where the clearing ended, exactly where he'd been before, chin tilted my way. I told myself there were 100 cameras out, that it didn't matter which way the lens pointed. The air dipped colder as the night wore on, and a thin fog began to snake through the lower branches. People joked about TikTok ghost videos. Someone yelled that the cops were coming just to get a rise out of the crowd. I told Evan I was going to take a leak and slipped into the tree line where glow sticks had been tied to branches every 30 feet, a breadcrumb trail back from the dark, the music muffled behind me. By the third glow stick, I realized I could still hear the generator clearly, like it was right behind me, even though I'd walked far enough that the lights from the clearing had disappeared. I finished and paused, listening to the night. There were no crickets, just the generator, a steady volume like a white noise machine in the next room, and something else, an irregular tapping, soft but deliberate like the tip of a cane testing the ground. I told myself it was someone messing around, spun a slow 360 with my phone light, and saw fog ribboning across the trunks. The moment I started back toward the clearing, the tapping stopped. By the second glow stick, I could see the cafe lights again, and the generator sounded farther away than it had in the dark. I came back to find that I'd misplaced my people. The crowd had shifted, or maybe it was all different faces under the same styles of masks. I circled twice, calling Evan, Maya, into the noise without shouting. No answer. I pulled out my phone and texted our group chat. By the fire, where are you at? It hung on sending for a good 15 seconds and then sat with no status at all. I tried calling Evan. It spun twice and kicked me straight to voicemail. I told myself it was the service. Then I looked up and saw Evan across the fire pit with his hands on his hips, talking to a girl in a witch hat. When I walked around the pit, threading between people, he wasn't there. I started to notice other things. The playlist had repeated the same 3-song run twice, maybe on purpose, maybe laziness. The cooler we'd left by a log had vanished, but my hoodie that I'd thrown on top of it was folded neatly on the ground, like someone had moved it carefully out of the way and put it back cleaner than I'd left it. I took a photo of the clearing to send to the group chat with "I'm here," and the image that saved was too crisp, the trees in the background unusually sharp while the people were smudged, like my camera had chosen to focus on the only part of the scene that wasn't moving and decided the rest was an accident. At 12:37 a.m., a hush rolled through the clearing like a breeze. Not silence that would have made sense, but a collective inhale from everyone at once, heads tilting a little like the deer in my parents' backyard when they catch a sound. I followed their gaze. The plague doctor was gone. The spot where he'd stood was empty, and the empty space looked wrong, like the idea of him had been cut out with scissors and left a flat hole behind. Someone laughed nervously and bumped my shoulder on their way past. I headed for the cars. I told myself I'd sit in mine where I could thaw out and see if Evan or Maya checked in. The path back to the road was a single-file trail beaten into the leaves. When I broke the tree line, my stomach dropped. The shoulder was empty. My Subaru was still there, but the whole line of vehicles we'd squeezed between when we arrived, the F-150, the Civics, the Outbacks, were all gone. Not headlights winding away through the trees, not taillights fatting, just fresh moisture on the gravel like a low fog had settled where hot hoods used to be. I unlocked my car with the key fob and watched the interior light blink on like a lighthouse in a sea of darkness. The cooler was in the back, untouched, and the passenger seats were dry and empty. On my dash, where CarPlay would usually connect, the screen read, "No devices." I pulled out my phone and opened Maps. The blue dot pulsed in a gray circle, and the address bar flashed the coordinates we'd saved, then flicked to a different set, then back again, like it couldn't decide which version of the same place I was in. I screenshotted without thinking. Later, those screenshots would contradict each other by just enough to make me dizzy. I went back because leaving didn't feel right without my friends. The clearing was somehow brighter and quieter at once. A girl in a glitter mask asked if I had a lighter. When I shook my head, she smiled too wide and said, "That's okay," without moving her mouth. I know how that sounds. I felt a crawling embarrassment at the back of my neck, like I was suddenly a sober person on a dance floor with no music, except the music was still playing and I was the only piece of the track out of sync. At 1:03 a.m., the generator died completely. The cafe lights went black and the fire dropped to a bed of red coals that painted everyone in a dull, bloody glow. There was no yelling or groaning or "oh" noise from the crowd that you'd expect when a party gets interrupted. People just stopped. In the darkness, the tapping began again, closer, unmistakable wood on dirt, an uneven rhythm. I felt it in the soles of my shoes, a tiny haptic pulse. The generator roared back 2 seconds later like someone had flipped a switch and rewound a tape. Everyone resumed mid-motion. I decided I was done. I pushed through toward the edge where the plague doctor used to stand. The fog was thicker there, rolling at ankle level, reluctant to lift. "Evan," I tried again, louder now. "Maya," a voice said my name from somewhere to my left. Not an echo, a close voice, a whisper that knew how I sounded when I said hello and sent it back to me with the same nerves. "Liam." I turned and aimed my phone light, but it swallowed itself in the fog like I'd pointed it into milk. At 1:18 a.m., I stepped on something hard. I bent down with the light and found the end of a cane, the tip made of worn rubber like the bottom of a walking stick that's been dragged miles. It was cold, colder than the ground around it. I pocketed it and kept moving toward voices that felt like lures cast into the trees. I don't know how long I walked. The sound of the party didn't change volume. It stayed the same steady level, as if I were walking in place and the clearing was a painting hung in front of me. The first blip of blue and red came at 1:44 a.m. through the trees. I braced for the rush, the scramble you see at bonfires when squads show up, people stashing bottles, ducking into cars, and sprinting into the woods. But there was no scramble. I stepped out onto the path to the road with my hands up, ready to say, "I'm good, I'm leaving," and found 2 sheriff's SUVs idling at an angle, their lights strobing quietly. A deputy with a neatly trimmed beard and a windbreaker stepped out and squinted at me, confused. "Where is everybody?" he asked. His voice wasn't aggressive. He sounded like a guy who'd walked into the wrong room by mistake. "What?" I gestured back at the clearing. "There's a party, hundreds of people." He shone his flashlight past me down the path and frowned. "We got a call about trespassers," he said. "We've been patrolling the loop all night. This trail been empty. Let's take a look." We walked the 10 yards back into the clearing together, and I swear, if you think I'm lying, keep listening, I swear the space was empty. No people, no string lights, no generator. The fire pit was a circle of cold stones with a dusting of ash. The logs where kids had been sitting were dry. There were no wet rings where beer had spilled. The deputy swung his light around like he expected to catch someone ducking, but it lit nothing but trunks and branches. "I don't understand," I said, hearing how thin my voice sounded. "I was just here. I've been here for hours." He kept his light low and looked me over. "You alone tonight?" "No, Evan and Maya, I drove them." I pulled out my phone and tried the group chat again. No response. I opened my camera roll to show him the photos of the crowd. The last 5 pictures were there, all time-stamped 11:58 p.m., even though I hadn't taken them all at once. Every single one showed the clearing, empty trees, the shape of the fire pit, the shadow my phone cast on my jacket, but no bodies, no faces. The second deputy came up behind us, panting like he'd jogged the path. "There's nobody at the cars," he said, and the words made me cold. He looked at me. "Dispatch shows a 911 hang-up from this area at 12:21 a.m., possibly from your number." He tilted his head at my phone. "You call us." I turned my screen, horrified. My recent calls showed nothing since the previous afternoon. "I didn't call," I said. "I couldn't, no service." He nodded slowly like he'd heard that line too many times. "All right, we need you to head out. The park closes at dusk. If you see your friends, tell them to leave by the main lot, not the shoulder." He paused. "Be careful driving. Fog's thicker on the highway." I walked back to the road with the deputies. My Subaru was the only car on the shoulder. Dew had collected on the windshield in beads, undisturbed, like it had been sitting there alone for hours. The deputy waited while I started it. He tapped my door with his knuckle and said, almost gently, "There was no party out here tonight, man." He glanced past me into the trees. "Not for a long time." I drove back to my apartment, hands at 10 and 2, heat cranked, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The highway was empty in both directions. When I parked behind my building and killed the engine, my phone started vibrating with a backlog of notifications catching up to service. A text from Maya came in first at 2:09 a.m. "You good? We went to Grant's place. Thought you bylaid." Then a photo from Evan at 12:50 a.m. of him and Maya on a couch with a bowl of Kit Kats on the coffee table, time-stamped and geotagged in town. "Where'd you end up?" he'd written, like I was the one who disappeared. When I tried to call them, both went straight to voicemail. I went inside and dumped my hoodie on the kitchen chair. The rubber cane tip I'd pocketed rolled out and landed with a soft thud. I stared at it. I hadn't imagined that. I hadn't imagined the hush rolling through 100 people like a tide, or the stiff turn of a long beak in the dark. I told myself I was tired, that my brain had filled in gaps the way it does when you wake up at night and think you see someone sitting in the corner who isn't there. I slept 2 hours and woke up at sunrise with the feeling a nightmare leaves behind in your chest even when you can't explain the plot. I drove back to the forest in daylight because logic said it would reset everything. The same shoulder, the same pull-off, now full of hikers unloading dogs and water bottles. I walked the path to the clearing and stood at the circle of stones. In the damp dirt were footprints, mine from the night before, hollowed deeper where I'd turned in place. No tread patterns except mine. No beer cans, no cigarette butts. Just a single thin gouge in the dirt, like someone had dragged a stick in a half-moon and stopped. Back home, I opened my camera roll again. The screenshots of the coordinates were there. One set put me in the park, and the other placed me 7 miles east, somewhere in the black rectangle of a reservoir. The 5 pictures I'd taken of the crowd had changed. In the far background of one, barely visible between 2 birch trunks, was a narrow triangle of black like the edge of a coat. In another, the reflection of my phone in the screen of my own sunglasses, held up to my face by a hand I didn't remember raising, showed a stretched shape behind me. A long nose, a smooth white curve, and the suggestion of a beak pressing into the curvature of the lens. That afternoon, I found something in the kangaroo pocket of my hoodie that I didn't remember putting there. It was a Polaroid, a real one, the kind that prints with a white border and a glossy face. The image was washed gray, like it had been underexposed. It showed the clearing in black and white, the circle of stones and the line of trees. In the middle, a person stood with a hand lifted to shield his face from the flash. It was me. In the left edge of the frame, cut off so that only the beak and one oval eye appeared, was the plague doctor. The back of the Polaroid had a series of numbers scrawled in blue pen. They were coordinates. They matched the reservoir. I didn't go to the reservoir. I told myself there are some places you don't tell curiosity to explore. I texted the photo of the Polaroid to Evan and Maya, and both of them said the same thing, almost word for word. "That's creepy, man, but that's not you. Why would you put a mask on for a selfie?" Neither of them remembered agreeing to a forest party. Neither of them remembered me picking them up. I scrolled my dashcam footage for the hour I'd driven out there, and it showed empty seats, a cooler in the back, and a driver singing along quietly to a song that never seemed to end. A week later, I went to the sheriff's office with the cane tip in a Ziploc bag. The deputy at the desk listened to me and then shrugged like a guy who's seen a lot of dumb Halloween stories. "We didn't break up anything out there," he said. "We had a patrol car on that road from 9 to 2 for speeders and kids messing around. If there was a party, it wasn't on our loop." When I asked about the 12:21 a.m. 911 hang-up, he typed for a minute and then shook his head. "No call from your number on the 31st. Are you sure you didn't but dial another night?" On my way out the door, the automatic glass hissed open like it had been waiting. For the next month, I woke up at exactly 12:08 a.m. 3 times a week, no alarm set, the time glowing in cheap blue from a Walmart digital clock that never used to catch my eye. Twice, my phone lit up at 1:44 a.m. with a call from unknown. The second time, I let it ring. The voicemail that landed said nothing for 8 seconds and then dragged out my name in the same whisper I'd heard in the trees. Whatever app transcribes messages in the notifications wrote, "Inaudible generator." I stopped telling the story at parties because it kills a room faster than being the sober one on a Friday night. When people ask now if I'm going out for Halloween, I say I've got plans with my cousin, or I'm driving home to help my mom hand out candy, or I'm tired. If someone presses, I pull up the Polaroid photo I took of the Polaroid itself, and let them decide if the warped white oval in the corner is a trick of the light or the eye hole of a mask leaning into frame. Last week, October rolled around again, and an airdrop request hit my phone while I was in line at a Wawa on my way home from work. Accept photo from unknown. I tapped yes without thinking, the way you do when a friend is trying to send you a picture of a sandwich or a dumb sign. The image that appeared was the same clearing from a slightly different angle. No people, a circle of stones, a darker patch in the dirt, like something heavy had been set there and lifted. In the top left corner of the image, cut off by the frame, is a shape like a beak. A minute later, my phone buzzed again, this time with a map's pin sent through messages from a number I didn't recognize. The preview a string of digits and the words "tonight, midnight." I didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. It sits there in my messages like a thumb pressed into soft wood, asking if I'm the kind of person who needs proof enough to go back. I still have the cane tip in my desk drawer. It's heavy for what it is, worn almost smooth at the very bottom. Sometimes it smells like wet leaves when I open the drawer, even in July. Some nights when the neighborhood is quiet, I swear I can hear a faint, irregular tapping on the sidewalk outside my apartment, like someone who doesn't mind walking alone is stopping to count the steps to my door. I lock the deadbolt and stare through the peephole into the hall, reminding myself I'm not 22 anymore, that I'm too old to be scared. The last thing that makes me question which version of that night is true is the note I found tucked under my windshield wiper 2 days ago after work. It was cut from the page of some old letter paper, the edges soft and brown, the ink uneven like it had been written with a fountain pen that leaked. It wasn't a threat. It was a single sentence in handwriting I almost recognized. "Thank you for coming." Underneath, in smaller print, were the same digits as the Polaroid. I haven't decided what I'm going to do with it. The police would probably tell me again that the party never existed. My photos would tell me the same. My friends would show me time-stamped videos of them eating candy on a couch 30 minutes away while I stood in a silent clearing inventing company. Maybe that's easier to accept, but every time I pass a rack of Halloween masks in a grocery store, I feel watched the way I did when a beak tilted toward me at the edge of the trees, and I catch myself listening for a generator that isn't there. I didn't reply to the latest pin. I don't want to know what happens if I ever show up on time. It started with a piece of candy I recognized before I even touched it. Not the brand, not the flavor, the way it was wrapped. It lay crooked in the pile of fun-sized bars and lollipops my 8-year-old daughter dumped across our kitchen island, tucked against the base of my pumpkin-scented candle like it had been placed there on purpose. I didn't need to pick it up to feel the heat rise in my face. My name is Stephanie, I'm 34, and this happened to us in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio, on Halloween night. We moved to this house in July. It's a single story with a small fenced yard and a maple that dumps leaves over the driveway the second the air turns. The street is the kind where porch lights all flip on around the same time, and the HOA sends a reminder about appropriate Halloween decorations. I'm a dental hygienist, which is its own kind of cosmic joke this time of year, and I'm the kind of mom who still sorts her kids' candy before bed. I say that to make it clear I wasn't looking for anything dramatic. I was looking for loose wrappers and busted seals. Last year, at a different place across town, I tried to be the cute candy neighbor. I used this roll of bat-patterned wax paper from Michael's to wrap little clusters of caramels. I folded the bottom into a triangle and sealed it with black electrical tape because I ran out of the stickers I'd bought. I tied a few with twine until my fingers cramped and then gave up. It ended up being more work than fun, and more kids took the full-size bars anyway. I told myself this year I'd keep it simple and safe and leave the crafting for Pinterest. This year we stuck to factory-sealed stuff. I put a blue ceramic bowl by the door, locked the storm door to keep the cat inside, and turned on the smallest fake candles in the window so the place didn't scream, "Come in." I walked with my daughter Lily from 6:05 p.m. to just after 8 p.m., staying on the inside of the sidewalk like all the other parents doing a head count in their heads. People wore the same lazy costumes, college kids in blood makeup and dads in flannels pretending to be lumberjacks. The weather was that crisp that makes the rappers sound louder. We got home around 8:12 p.m., the digital clock on the stove telling me in green numbers I had enough time to sort before bedtime battles. I put the blue bowl back on the console table and locked the deadbolt. Lily sat on the island stool, kicking her legs and making piles chocolate gummies, the gross kind. I poured hot water for tea and got a Ziploc bag ready for anything that looked off. There's a light over our sink that makes everything look a little yellow. It's ugly, but I leave it on because the rest of the kitchen feels too dark without it. The piece I recognized was wrapped in bat-patterned wax paper, the same tiny flying shapes, the same faint gloss. It had the same triangular fold at the bottom and a strip of black electrical tape pinning it shut at a slight angle, sloppy the way mine always were. I lifted it and felt the weight of caramels inside, the exact kind I'd used last year. For a second I thought, irrationally, that it had somehow been in our pantry this entire time. Then I turned it and saw, in neat block letters written with a ballpoint pen, our new address on the tape. "Where'd you get this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual as my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. Lily shrugged, busy inspecting a ring pop. "I dunno, the guy with the big hoodie, near the cul-de-sac with the skeleton lawn." I pressed. "Skeleton hoodie," she nodded, like that should explain everything. "He didn't have a costume, just a hoodie with a skeleton on it. He was giving out the boring ones." She shoved the ring pop onto her finger and held it up to the light like a jewel. I carried the wrapped piece to the sink and examined it under that ugly yellow bulb. If I had needed more proof, I found it in the lazy scissor nick on the top edge. I sometimes cut the paper from the roll at a slight diagonal when my hands were tired. I remembered it from last year because it meant the paper folded crooked unless I flipped it. The candy inside shifted like sticky marbles. The address on the tape was ours, the one we moved into this summer. The handwriting was careful and unfamiliar. I slid the candy into the Ziploc, pressed all the air out, and sealed it hard. After I tucked Lily in, I opened the Ring app and started scrubbing through notifications. I saw a parade of kids in plastic masks at our door at 7:27 p.m., a kid in a vampire cape tripping on our step, and a dog sniffing the mums I'd forgotten to water. I skipped forward and back until my thumb cramped. Around 6:43 p.m., a clip from a few streets over Birch Lane caught my eye. A cluster of kids, including Lily in her Elsa dress, moved past a man in a black skeleton hoodie standing off the sidewalk. He wasn't at a door. He was just there, arm out, dropping single pieces into bags. I paused and went frame by frame. His hood was up and his face was a shadow with a nose profile you don't notice until you try. He reached down specifically into Lily's bag as she stopped to readjust her crown. He didn't look at the camera. He didn't look at anything. It was like he knew exactly which costume was hers and exactly when to dip his hand. I didn't see a car behind him or any porch with a bowl. When I turned the volume up, the wind hissed through the mic, and under it there was the shape of a word. I couldn't be sure it was a word at all. I called the non-emergency line because part of me already felt stupid. The dispatcher asked a few questions in that tired voice people get on busy nights. Was the packaging sealed? No. Any threats written? Our address. She said an officer could swing by, but also said it happens sometimes. People think it's funny, swapping wrappers or writing weird things. Toss it to be safe. She gave me a case number I wrote on the back of an old grocery list and told me to call 911 if anyone came to the house. I thanked her and hated how polite I sounded. At 11:18 p.m., after I'd rinsed mugs and checked the back slider twice, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. The thumbnail was a smear of gray porch and a white blur I couldn't place. I tapped it and watched. Dead leaves skittered across the concrete in the kind of pattern that makes you think of footsteps. The camera switched from color to black and white as the porch light timed out. There was a sound then, faint, fast, like a tiny piece of paper being crumpled and uncrumpled. The frame held empty. Whatever made the noise was either out of frame or didn't want to be seen. In the morning, I walked out to get the newspaper, even though I read everything on my phone. The sun felt too bright after a bad night's sleep, and the street was back to normal, with pumpkins sagging and empty candy wrappers in the gutters. When I reached our mailbox, the little red flag was raised. I don't remember raising it. Propped under the flag, pinned by a sliver of black tape, was another bat-wrapped candy. This one had our address written again, underlined, and below it a time in tiny numbers. 8:12 p.m. It was the exact minute we walked back in our door. I lifted the candy by the very corner and dropped it into a lunch bag. I scanned the yards and porches like I'd see someone watching, but an older couple down the street was just rolling a trash bin. I texted my neighbor across from us, Tom, retired, always on his porch, and asked if he'd seen anything weird after 11 p.m. He replied a few minutes later. Saw a tall guy on the sidewalk around midnight. He wore something with reflective stripes, like a delivery vest. Thought it was too late for that, but didn't look twice. I asked which way he'd come from. Tom wrote, from the direction of the cul-de-sac. That afternoon, I added an extra stick-on alarm to the back door and moved a chair under the kitchen window lock. I told Lily we were going to skip her after-school reading circle, and she didn't mind. When I pulled into the driveway after a quick grocery run, a gray sedan rolled past slowly, not unusual for a weekday, but slow enough that I noticed. The driver's window was down halfway. Someone's arm rested on the sill. I couldn't see a face, just fingers tapping the door in a rhythm that felt deliberate. Lily waved because kids wave at cars. The arm didn't wave back. The sedan kept going. That night the house felt too quiet and too loud at the same time. At 9:37 p.m. there was a soft tap on the back slider, not the door, the glass. Our cat, a fat orange lump who only moves for tuna, stared at the slider with his ears tilted in a way I'd never seen. I picked up my phone and walked close enough to leave a faint oval of breath on the glass. In the reflection, my own face looked wrong. The outside was dark enough that, for a second, I saw nothing. Then I noticed a faint smudge, like the ghost of a fingerprint, higher on the pane than I could reach without a step stool. I called 911 then because I needed someone else's footsteps in my house. When the officer arrived at 10:02 p.m., he walked the yard with a flashlight and made a full show of checking the gate and around the AC unit. He found a partial sneaker tread in the wet leaves against the slider and the suggestion of another near the spigot. "It's been raining, so it's mushy," he said. "Hard to tell direction. Could be kids, could be the mail guy cut through." I mentioned the candy. He scratched the back of his neck and said, "Document everything. Add more motion lights. We'll drive past a couple of times tonight." After he left, I sat at the island with the Ring app open like it was a TV I couldn't turn off. At 12:14 a.m., I scrubbed back to the clip on Birch Lane and tried to catch the shape the man's mouth made. I turned the volume all the way up, and the room filled with the sound of neighbor kids lifting candy and shuffling. As Lily moved into frame with her Elsa dress, the man's hood turned a fraction. His hand, pale and dry-looking, dipped toward her bag. In that gravelly filter the mics put on everything, I heard it. "For you." Not loud, not playful, just flat, like a delivery. I paused on his wrist and leaned as close to the screen as I could. A hospital-style bracelet circled it, the translucent kind you get when they check you in and print your name in tiny blocks. It sat too tight, leaving a red groove. The black skeleton bones on his hoodie sleeve were cracked and flacking near the elbow like it had been washed 100 times. Something about that detail made my stomach go cold in a way even the address hadn't. People don't wear those bracelets for fun. They forget to take them off when no one is reminding them. At 1:03 a.m., the porch camera caught a figure moving fast enough to blur and then stopping just out of frame, as if they knew the exact angle. The doormat lifted at the corner and fell back with a soft slap. By the time I got to the door, whoever had been there was gone. Under the mat was a cheap white envelope, no stamp, no writing. Inside were three things: bat-patterned wax paper folded around nothing, like a wrapper after the candy is gone, a 2-inch strip of black electrical tape stuck to the sleeve of one of the papers, and printed in small neat letters on each paper dates 10/31/21, 10/31/22, and 10/31/23. I put the empty wrappers and envelope into a second Ziploc with gloves from our winter box because it felt like something you weren't supposed to touch. When I poured the last of the tea into the sink, I noticed my hand was shaking so hard the cup clinked against the faucet. I took Lily's ring pop off her nightstand and moved it to the kitchen because the thought of any piece of candy near her bed made my skin crawl. I called the non-emergency line again and asked for the same case number. This time they said they'd send someone to take a report in the morning. Morning came with a headache that made the ceiling seem slightly lower. The officer who showed up was younger and kinder in the way people are when they don't yet know how weird things can get. He took photos, bagged the envelope, and asked if I had anyone who might be mad at us. I told him no. He said, "It might be someone who remembers your house from last year and thinks this is their joke." I said we moved. He wrote that down like it was a detail that would lead to something. He suggested I keep the porch light on even during the day and apply for a neighborhood watch Facebook group. I tried to make the day normal for Lily. We did homework. We watched a movie. We avoided the kitchen island. Around 5 p.m., I remembered the roll of bat wax paper in a storage bin under the sink and pulled it out on an impulse. The edge of the roll was jagged where I'd ripped it last year, and there was a notch missing from a place where I'd cut it weird and trimmed it. I held one of the empty wrappers from the envelope against the roll like I could match fibers. It was ridiculous, but the tear pattern aligned in a way that felt like a coincidence too tight to be a coincidence. At 7:13 p.m., the ring chimed again, not the porch camera this time, but the inside motion sensor I'd put on the hall by the garage door. It picked up the cat sometimes, but the app knew the difference and labeled it person. I held my breath and watched the clip. The frame was the shadowy rectangle of our laundry closet, and the door to the garage was shut tight. For 5 seconds, the hall light clicked on and then off again like a bulb dying. In the middle of those 5 seconds, a shape crossed the frame at the very edge. Not a body, just the suggestion of a shoulder, a curve where a hood might be. I told myself it was the cat. I told myself it was the sensor freaking out. I checked the garage anyway, holding my phone like it was a flashlight even though it has one built in. The garage smelled like wet cardboard and old paint. The interior door was locked. The overhead door was closed. The only thing that looked wrong was the tiny line of dust disturbed along the top of the blue candy bowl on the shelf by the freezer. A finger-width clean swipe through the gray. I wiped it away and told myself I'd done it without noticing. Around 9:50 p.m., Lily called from her room. "Mom." It was that voice kids use when they aren't sure if they should be scared. I walked impatient and slow like we'd practiced for bad dreams. She pointed at the window where the curtain didn't quite meet at the middle because the rod had fallen crooked a month ago and I kept forgetting to fix it. There, taped to the inside latch of the window inside, was a narrow strip of black electrical tape. I didn't pull it off. I didn't touch it. I took a photo with my hands so steady it shocked me, and then shut and locked the bedroom door and called 911 again. 2 officers came this time and checked every corner of the house. No forced entry, no fingerprints they could see with their little flashlight kits. Sometimes the tape from manufacturing sticks to things, even inside, one of them said in a tone that sounded almost apologetic. I didn't argue because the fact they were standing in my hallway made me feel better than arguing would have. They stood at the doorway and told me to double-check the windows, to keep the alarm on away mode even when I was home, and to consider staying somewhere else for a night or two. I said I would. They left tire tracks in the wet leaves at the curb. I started packing that night, 2 duffels, one for clothes, one for the essentials I could not face coming back for, Lily's baby blanket, the folder with our birth certificates, and the cat carrier. I went to grab the Ziploc with the original candy so I could hand it to whoever asked for it next, and it wasn't where I had left it, the top left drawer with paper clips and warranties. I emptied the drawer onto the island. Nothing. I found it 20 minutes later, zipped back up and tucked into the small front pocket of Lily's backpack, the one she never uses because it snags. She swore she hadn't touched it. I believed her. I slept at my sister's place 2 towns over for the rest of that week. On the 3rd night, long after the trick-or-treat routes went back to being just sidewalks, a padded envelope arrived at my sister's house with no return address. The postmark was smudged, but it looked local. Inside, wrapped in plain tissue, was a single piece of candy in bat-patterned wax paper. The tape sealing it was clear instead of black this time, and the block letters on it said our address, the new one, and beneath that, nice bowl. We hadn't posted any pictures. I hadn't mentioned the bowl to anyone but the officers. I brought the envelope to the station because I didn't know what else to do. They logged it and said the same things about documenting, about being vigilant, and about not opening any packages. They asked if I'd heard from anyone I dated in the last year that seemed off. I said no. They asked if I'd noticed anyone new on our street who paid too much attention. I said everyone pays too much attention when you tell them to. The officer offered a patrol once an hour for a couple nights if I went home. I said I'd think about it and went back to my sister's guest room, where the ceiling fan clicks every 4th rotation. 2 days later, I did go home because you can't stay away from the life you have forever. I changed the locks. I added a dowel in the slider track. I left the ugly yellow sink light on all night. November slipped into the gray cold that makes the neighborhood look like a photograph no one framed. Sometimes at 2:14 a.m., the porch camera would wake me with a motion alert I didn't open. Sometimes I'd open it anyway and see nothing but a moth zipping around like a bad thought. I made hot cocoa for Lily and walked her to school and pretended I didn't glance over my shoulder every 10 steps. On the first Saturday of November, I took the blue ceramic bowl down from the garage shelf because it felt like proof that I imagined the clean line of dust. It was heavier than I remembered. Something slid inside it when I shifted it. I set it on the island and looked in. At the bottom was a tiny folded square of bat-patterned wax paper, empty, and a piece of black electrical tape stuck back onto itself in a loop, like a child makes with stickers when they're done. Written on the tape in those same neat block letters was a date and time. 10:31, 6:45 p.m., the exact minute Lily put on her crown before we left the house. I don't know how he got the tape into the bowl. I don't know if it was the cat brushing something in, or the bowl catching a draft I never felt, or if there's an answer that will make me feel stupider than I already do. I only know we didn't hand out candy this year after that. I kept the porch lights off and the curtains shut, and still, a single piece of that bat paper fluttered in the morning under the edge of the welcome mat like a leaf that didn't belong to any tree. Nothing else happened that night. Nothing happened the night after. Last week, a text came from an unknown number while I was in the grocery store aisle with the seasonal displays being replaced by Thanksgiving turkeys. It was a low-quality photo, a picture of my kitchen island lit by the ugly yellow sink light, except the island was clear, wiped perfectly clean, and the focus of the photo was a single wrapped candy in the center of the butcher block, bat paper and all. In the reflection on the shiny surface, you can see a shape where the person taking it stood, just out of frame, just at the edge of what the light could hold. I closed the text and deleted it and blocked the number. I'm telling this because I still don't know if the handwriting on the tape was meant to warn me, or to let me know I'm already too late. I don't know if he kept one of my stupid Pinterest candies from last year, or if he kept something else I don't want to figure out. I don't even know what for you was supposed to mean beyond the obvious. All I know is that I keep thinking about how he underlined our address on the second one like he was making sure I saw it. Like the important part wasn't the candy at all. Like the important part was that he wants me to understand he knows where I live. I threw away the wrappers the way they told me to. I changed the codes in the locks and the bulbs. I still hear the tiny crinkle of wax paper sometimes in the silence between the house settling and the heat kicking on. And every time the porch camera pings after midnight, I picture a hand hovering just out of frame, holding a pen steady over a strip of tape, writing what he wants me to read next. The last clip I couldn't sleep after was at 12:03 a.m. last Tuesday, the porch empty, the leaves still, and the sound of someone standing way too close and whispering something quiet enough to make me turn the volume all the way up. It wasn't the words that scared me. It was how close to the microphone he had to lean to say them. I used to think the worst thing about Halloween was the cold air slipping under your jacket while you waited on a dark porch. Last year I learned it's hearing your own name spoken from a house everyone swore was empty. My name is Oliver, I'm 19 now, and I live in a quiet New Jersey suburb that looks exactly like those stock photos of cul-de-sacs and trimmed hedges. The kind of place where the loudest sound after 10 p.m. is a distant leaf blower or a train horn you can't see. Growing up here, we had the same neighborhood traditions every October: plastic skeletons zip-tied to porch rails, a hay bale with a scarecrow, motion lights that caught every kid in a costume. And at the end of our block, there was the one that gave out full-size candy bars. It sat on a corner lot, a low split level with beige vinyl siding and dark green shutters. The yard was always perfectly edged like a barber lineup. The bushes looked squared off by a ruler. The blinds never opened, not once in all the years I'd passed it. The mailbox had a polished brass flag and the numbers 114 in stick-on chrome, and there was a storm door with a long oval pane you couldn't see through at night. On Halloween, there would be a plastic bowl on a little wrought iron table with a hand-lettered sign, "Please take one." Kids actually listened because there was always enough. It wasn't the fun-sized stuff crammed into a bag. It was the bars you get from the checkout aisle at Target: king-size Snickers, Twix, Kit Kats, sometimes whole Hershey's with almonds. Nobody ever saw who put the bowl out, no cars in the driveway, no one taking trash cans to the curb. I'd walked by after school and seen a UPS sticker on the door, then passed again later and the sticker was gone, the package gone too, but not because anyone opened the door. It was just different, like the house edited small things when you weren't looking. In our group chat, kids called it the Candy House, like it needed a fairy tale name to make sense. My mom used to joke that a dentist lived there, and this was his way of drumming up business, but she never laughed when she said it. Last year was supposed to be my final Halloween as an actual trick-or-treater. I wasn't going to go out, but my friends talked me into roaming the block for nostalgia. We threw on lazy costumes, hoodie plus mask, basic stuff, and did the loop mostly for the vibe. It was colder than usual, mid-40s and windy, so we stuck to the lit houses. Around 8:30 p.m., we turned the corner and saw the bowl at 114 sitting there under the motion light like it had been waiting for us. There were still a lot of bars left. The sign looked new, the same neat letters, "Please take one." Riley plucked 2 bars and slid one into my pillowcase like she was my mom, and Damon nudged me with his elbow. "Bet you won't knock," he said. I laughed it off first. Everyone talks big when they're not the one walking up to a door, but I was the one who lived on this block the longest. My logic was that worst case, whoever lived there would tell me to beat it. Best case, I'd prove it wasn't that deep, just an older person who didn't like company. The wind was already pushing leaves against our sneakers. It felt like if I didn't do it right then, I'd think about it all year. I told them to film in case a cranky neighbor yelled, then I walked up the path. The grass smelled sweet the way it does after a fresh cut, but nobody had been outside with a mower that day. One of those fake cobwebs from another house had drifted over and snagged on their mailbox, and it trembled even though the wind had let up. I stopped at the storm door and stared at my reflection in the oval glass. Behind it was the main door, dark wood, glossy, with the worn mark where a wreath had hung for years and years. I lifted my hand to knock. Before my knuckles hit, the inner door opened by itself, not the storm door, the real door. It swung inward like a breath taken too fast, and the hinge didn't make a sound. I froze with my hand in the air and stared into a hallway that was completely dark except for a weak strip of light from somewhere deeper inside. I couldn't make out furniture. I could only smell something faintly chemical, like drier sheets and old air. Then a voice whispered my name from the black, clear as someone standing 6 inches from my ear. "Oliver." I don't remember deciding to move. My legs just took me down the steps. The pillowcase of candy whacked my thigh as I walked back to the sidewalk. My friends were already backing away, their phones down. "Dude, did you open it?" Damon asked, but his voice was thin. I shook my head. I didn't say anything about the whisper, not right then. I looked back once, and the door was closed like nothing happened, the storm door reflecting the streetlight, the bowl still full. We cut the block short and headed home separate, like we were suddenly too old to be caught walking together in costumes. By 11:07 p.m. I'd taken off my mask and emptied my bag on my bedroom floor. The hall looked ridiculous, spread out, full-size bars stacked like I'd robbed a movie theater. There was something else at the bottom, under a Nestle Crunch and a Reese's. It was a bar in an old-fashioned wrapper, the kind of waxy paper you only see in vintage photos. The print on it looked off like a copy of a brand. On the back, someone had written my name in black marker in capital letters, Oliver. I could see the pen strokes. Under the nutrition facts was a faded expiration date, 10/1998. Texted the group chat a photo. None of them had anything like it. Riley sent a bunch of question marks and then, okay, did the house put that in your bag? Damon just sent a skull emoji. My stomach had that hollow feeling you get when you're about to say something stupid. I finally told them the door opened by itself and I heard my name. Nobody replied for a minute. Then Riley said, don't mess with me, and Damon said, it's a prank. I flipped the bar over and stared at the written name again. My mom was on a night shift at the hospital until 7 a.m., so the house was just me and the clink of the heat turning on. At 12:23 a.m., someone knocked on our front door. Not loud, 3 soft taps like the impatient way a friend knocks when you're taking too long. I stood there in my socks in the hallway listening for a second knock. It didn't come. I cracked the peephole. Our porch light was on. There was nobody on the step, just my doormat and a damp leaf melting into the fibers, and sitting right in the middle like a display, another full-size bar in the same waxy wrapper, the ink on the label a little blurred from the cold. There wasn't a note this time. I opened the door fast enough to spook myself and looked left and right. The neighborhood was empty, no cars rolling by, no late dog walker. We have a Ring camera. I went to the app and rewound to 12:23. The video flagged motion and its little orange figure lit up, but on screen there was just the top half of our storm door. The porch bulb made that buzzing halo that LED bulbs get in cameras. The audio picked up as the motion alert did, like a switch. First came the normal night wind tick, a car a few blocks over, and then at 12:23:12, a whisper close to the mic but thin, like it came through the door. Good choice. The words didn't match the movement on screen because there wasn't any. The candy bar wasn't there. Then at 12:23:17 I refreshed the feed, and in the next clip it was just sitting on the mat. The police non-emergency line told me to bring the camera footage to the station in the morning if I felt unsafe. The dispatcher sounded tired in the normal way, not rude, just unable to prioritize a weird candy situation at 1 a.m. If you see someone in your yard, call 911, she said. I sent the second wrapper photo to the group chat and set the bars on my desk. I wanted to throw them away. I also wanted to make it all mundane by eating one and turning on a dumb movie. Instead, I shut my bedroom door and locked it, which is something I never do. I woke up 3 times before sunrise to check that the wrappers were still where I left them. Halloween fell on a Tuesday last year, so the neighborhood was quiet the next morning. Before school, I walked down to 114 like I had an errand. I figured it would be a normal house in daylight, and I'd hate myself for losing sleep. The blinds were down still, and the bowl was gone. No decorations at all. I stood on the sidewalk reading the small details I'd never noticed. A tiny hairline crack in the porch step, a dead moth flattened in the corner of the storm door frame, the reflection of my hoodie. When I turned to go, I heard a dryer beep from inside, that single bright note you get when a cycle ends. I told myself it could be anything, an alarm, a timer. The sound came again when I reached the mailbox. I wrote a note that afternoon because I needed to drag the fear into a shape I could handle. It said, "Who are you?" I folded it in half and slid it under the doormat at 114 at 5:06 p.m. The sun was going down and the cold was settling in fast, that kind of early dark that makes you misjudge time. I walked the long way home past the park, cut across the baseball field, and came up my street from the other side. At 6:12 p.m. there was a white envelope on my porch with no stamp and my name written on the front in the same careful block letters as the bar. Inside was my note. The words "knock" were typed in the center in 12-point Times New Roman. I didn't knock that night or the next. I wish I could say it was bravery or caution, but it was nothing big, just tiredness and that floating sensation of being watched. On Thursday, wrappers started appearing on my route home from school. Not piles, not messes, one wrapper, then 30 feet later, another. They weren't from the brands I'd taken. They were waxy and old-fashioned, the kind you see in antique candy store displays. Each one had been folded neatly into a rectangle like a playing card and placed on the sidewalk seam. I followed them without meaning to wrapper, until I was 2 doors down from 114, and there weren't any more. On Friday, a small padded mailer was on our welcome mat when I got home at 4:38 p.m. No return address, just my name and our house number written in black marker. Inside was a standard silver house key on a dull brass key ring with a little plastic tab. The tab had a paper insert with my initials, OB, printed like a file label. I recognized the key immediately because I'd lost my spare the summer before. The thought that someone had picked it up on the sidewalk and returned it months later would have felt normal, even nice, except the envelope also held a Polaroid. In the picture, I was standing on the candy house porch with my hand raised like I was about to knock. The door behind the storm door was open a crack. The timestamp printed along the white strip said 10:31:8:46 p.m. I hadn't texted my mom any of this because she was working long shifts and I didn't want to make her worry on top of everything else. That night after dinner, I took the Polaroid to the station and showed a desk officer. He looked at it like he was trying to place a face from a family reunion. Probably a prank, he said. Anybody at school got a Polaroid camera. I told him it wasn't like that. The door had opened before I knocked, the whispering, the rappers. He wrote down a report number on a sticky note and told me to call if anyone came to the house again. He didn't sound dismissive. He sounded like someone who had a stack of real emergencies. I went to 114 at 2:02 a.m. on Saturday because the silence was worse than anything else and I felt stupid being scared of a building. The neighborhood was dead, no cars, no porch lights except the timer set ones, the kind of cold that gets into your sleeves. I started a voice memo on my phone, put it in my jacket pocket mic up, and walked straight up the path. The house smelled faintly like heat dust, that burnt smell from vents when you turn the furnace on for the first time. I put my hand on the storm door handle. The inner door opened again. This time it swung wider enough that I saw the first 3 feet of the hallway. There was a runner rug with a pattern that's back in style now but looked old here, sun-faded in a line. To the right was a small round table with a bowl sitting on it, the same plastic bowl from Halloween. It was empty. Deeper in down the hall, a soft yellow light blinked once like a lamp flicked on and off. Then I heard it, the dryer beep, one little tone. "Come back," the same whisper said, and it didn't sound like an invitation. It sounded like a rule being enforced. I took one step past the threshold and stopped. On the wall were frames. Family photos, I thought, but there weren't adults in them. They were shots of trick-or-treaters on the porch. Different years, different camera quality, different costumes. I saw a girl in a witch hat with orange yarn hair, the sleeves of her sweatshirt sticking out under her dress, a kid with a foam Minecraft head, a boy in football pads holding his helmet under his arm. Each frame had a date written on the mat in neat black pen, always October 31. My eyes jumped from face to face and then to myself. There I was in my hoodie and dollar store mask hanging off one ear, time-stamped from Tuesday night. The mat under mine had the year written already. Something in the hallway reflected motion back at me from deeper inside, and I instinctively looked up as if someone else had come in behind me. My phone buzzed hard in my jacket, an alert from the ring, "Person detected at your front door." I stepped backward onto the porch like the floor had moved. The inner door started to close on its own, smooth, slow. I was already halfway down the steps when it clicked shut. The storm door made no sound. I checked the ring alert on the sidewalk with my breath coming out white. The live view showed my porch, my mat, my pumpkin deflated and collapsed on itself, and something leaned against my door, the plastic bowl from 114 with a "Please take one" sign taped to it. The voice memo I'd started picked up more than I heard in the moment. When I played it back later, you can hear the night air, my shoes on the steps, the soft drift of the door closing. At 000117, there's the dryer beep again, even though I was on the porch by then. At 000122, layered with the wind, there are overlapping voices all whispering the same thing, "Come back," over and over, different ages, different distances. The last whisper is my mother's voice. She doesn't say, "Come back." She says my name, Oliver, in that precise tone she uses when she knocks on my bedroom door at 6 a.m. to see if I'm up for school. She was at the hospital at that exact minute. At 2:14 a.m., the ring recorded another clip. There was a person detected. It was tagged as sound. The audio is short, just the sound of candy sliding across plastic and a dry little laugh after it. When I opened our front door at 2:19 a.m., the bowl was full of the same old-style bars and paper wrappers, stacked end-to-end like a display. Underneath, where the bowl had pressed a circle into the doormat, was a Polaroid face down. The picture was taken from our front yard looking up at my bedroom window. My blinds were open a sliver. In the reflection on the glass, you could see me standing in the hallway of 114. I didn't sleep in my room the next 2 nights. I dragged a blanket to the couch and left the TV on low volume. Every time I turned off a light, some shadow in the corner of the room looked like a figure until I forced myself to blink. Sunday afternoon, I walked past 114 one more time as if the fear would dilute with repetition. A "For Sale BY Owner" sign had appeared in the yard since morning. The phone number was smudged by drizzle and unreadable. There was no sign of anyone packing or moving, no boxes, no car in the drive, nothing to sell. The bowl was back on the small table inside the door, visible if you cupped your hands against the outer glass and peered in hard enough. On Monday, I got a DM on Instagram from an account with 0 posts, 0 followers, 0 following. It contained one photo, the candy bars arranged on my doormat spelling Oliver with their long edges. The time stamp on the screenshot said 5:11 a.m. I hadn't been awake. The account disappeared when I tried to click the profile. I deleted the photo from my phone and then emptied the recently deleted folder like that action could erase the situation. When I left for class, I put my hand on the doorknob and felt sticky residue right at thumb level, as if someone had pressed their hand there and stood a while. I told myself I wouldn't go back to 114 again. I did what people do when something scares them without being technically illegal. I adjusted my routes and made myself small. Halloween decorations stayed up on the block longer than usual because it rained the next weekends and nobody wanted to deal with wet extension cords. The candy house sat the same way every day, the blinds down, the lawn crisp without effort. The FOR sales sign fell flat against the grass in a windstorm and never got picked up. When I made eye contact with the oval of glass in the storm door from the sidewalk, the reflection was always a little wrong, like it lagged a fraction of a second. 2 weeks later, a slim cardboard box arrived with my name and our address printed on a label, the kind you get from an online shop. Inside was tissue paper wrapped with a piece of thin twine. When I unfolded it, I found a new plastic bowl, identical to the one from 114, and a bundle of laminated sheets. Each sheet had "Please take one" in that same clean handwriting, perfect as if traced. Taped to the bottom of the bowl was another Polaroid. This one wasn't taken at 114. It was taken across the street from my house at night. You could see my porch, the streetlight flare, and 2 small blurred figures on the sidewalk, kids holding out pillowcases, waiting patiently. My mom and I moved apartments in March, not because of the house, at least that's what we told people. Her commute to the hospital would be shorter, the rent was doable, and the place had a small balcony with a view of a Wawa parking lot that never fully sleeps. I didn't say goodbye to anyone on the old block except Riley and Damon threw a wave from my car as we packed. Every time we pulled a box toward the trunk, I felt my eyes flick left to where 114 sat indifferent to our plans. When we drove away, the house was the last thing I saw in the rear view, and the oval of glass caught the sun like an eye. I didn't think about Halloween again until October rolled in and the aisles at ShopRite turned orange. The apartment building isn't the kind of place kids canvass. It's mostly students and nurses and people who work late. I figured I'd skip candy entirely, no regrets, no bowl. On the morning of the 31st, there was a package outside our door with a shipping label printed from a kiosk. The return address line was blank. Inside was a bag of assorted full-size bars and a single key on a brass ring. The key had a small plastic tag with our new apartment number written on the paper insert in the same careful hand. Tucked under the key was a note that said, "Don't forget to leave the bowl." At 6:04 p.m., while I was making ramen, I heard kids in the hallway. Not running around, just walking with a parent somewhere, whispering, excited like you get when you're wearing a costume and you feel special. Our doorbell buzzed once. It's a harsh sound here, not a friendly chime, and it made my heart knock against my ribs. When I opened the door, there was a plastic bowl on our welcome mat. My bowl. The laminated "Please take one" was taped to the front with blue painter's tape, like someone had tried to be careful not to scuff the door. It was already half empty. I leaned into the hallway to see if someone had set it down and stepped away. The corridor was long and quiet and smelled like heat. A few doors down, a man carried a trash bag toward the chute and didn't look over. On the bottom of the bowl was a faint smear, an oily thumbprint in the exact spot where you grip it to set something down gently. I brought the bowl inside and shut the door with my foot. The key from the package was still on the counter. It didn't fit any lock in the apartment that I tried. I put it back down and realized my hands were shaking a little. I took the bowl back out and left it because that felt like the path of least resistance, like not replying to an email you shouldn't have to answer but still do. When I checked an hour later, there were only 2 bars left. A flyer for a local gym had been tucked carefully under the bowl's edge as if someone wanted to keep the bowl from sliding. Around 9:18 p.m., our building got that quiet it gets when Netflix hums through thin walls and people are settling down. I turned off the kitchen light and the living room lamp and only left the TV's glow. On the TV, a sitcom audience laughed like water boiling in a pot. At 10:03 p.m., someone knocked on our door in that same 3-tap pattern from last year. Not a neighbor's knock, a patience test. I stood still in the dark and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, no bowl, no gym flyer, just the beige carpet and the scuffed strip of wall at suitcase height. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from an unknown number, no name, no photo. The message was a single line, "Look at your balcony." I took 2 steps back from the peephole and my brain did that thing where it tries to solve the wrong problem first. Do I call the building office? Do I call 911? And then I walked to the sliding glass door and pulled the vertical blind a slat to the side. The bowl sat on the balcony floor against the rail like a pet that had let itself in. The laminated sign was leaning inside of it. A bar wrapper had been set on the rim so carefully that it balanced there without falling. I didn't open the door. I stood and watched the wrapper wobble a little from a draft it shouldn't have felt. I watched until my eyes stung. When I finally blinked, the wrapper wasn't balanced anymore. It lay flat over the bowl like a sealed lid. I didn't reply to the text. I slid the blind closed and put the phone face down and listened to the outside air tamp itself against the glass. In the morning, the bowl was gone. That should have been the end, a glitch in a story I could edit as creepy but explainable, something I could place in the box of apartment weirdness. Except now, every time I come home, there's a faint, oily mark on our door at the exact height where a hand would rest while waiting for me to open it. And on the inside, on our side of the door, the same mark is starting to appear, a little higher, like whoever is waiting knows I'm taller than I used to be. I used to love how phone cameras make a night look better than it felt. The last Halloween I went out, my camera did the opposite. It showed me something I definitely didn't feel. We took one group photo before leaving my apartment, 5 of us shoulder to shoulder on the cheap runner by my front door. I didn't notice the 6th person until my phone tried to tag her. I'm Jenna, 24, and at the time I lived on the 3rd floor of a brick walk-up just off Passyunk in South Philly. My roommate Liv and I did a simple pregame, some hard seltzers, a pumpkin-scented candle from Bath & Body Works, the string lights in our living room set to orange. We were heading to a house party in Fishtown at a friend of a friend's place. Our apartment had that old building layout, narrow hallway, tiny galley kitchen, a long living room that felt bigger because I had a cheap wall mirror leaning behind a plant. Outside our door, our neighbor across the hall had one of those foam, bloody handprints on their wreath that made you double take when you waited for the elevator. It was cold enough that the balcony railing had a little slickness on it, but not full winter yet. I was dressed as a last-minute flapper using a thrift store dress, and Liv had a black cat headband and eyeliner whiskers she did in the bathroom mirror under the worst fluorescent light ever. 2 friends came over, Maya in a football jersey and I black, Sean as a vampire with cheap plastic fangs. Our 5th was Eli, the kind of guy who says he's not dressing up and then arrives in a pilot's hat anyway. We were loud because we were nervous about the party being boring. At 8:03 p.m., I propped my phone on a little spice jar on the console table by the door and set the timer. The backdrop was the wall with the framed map of Philadelphia we got off Etsy and a sliver of the mirror's edge catching the hallway. I hit the shutter, counted down with the little beeps, and we did the normal thing, squeeze in, point at the camera like idiots, and hold still. The flash fired twice. I remember being annoyed at the little white dot in my eyes it left, like after you look at a streetlight too long. We were out the door by 8:11 p.m. doing that stomp run down narrow stairs you do when you're trying not to make noise but you're still excited. I locked the deadbolt and jiggled the doorknob once out of habit. In the lift, I opened the Photos app to pick a shot for Instagram. The picture looked normal, 5 faces, 5 costumes, the map on the wall, a line of light from the kitchen reflecting in the mirror. I added a pumpkin emoji in the location tag and posted it without thinking. At 8:26 p.m., while we were crossing Washington Ave, Maya texted me from the back seat even though she was 3 feet away. It said, "Who's the girl behind us smiling?" I thought she was joking and typed, "Lol what," but she didn't laugh. She zoomed in on my screen and tapped near my shoulder. The picture was already uploaded to my story, the little circle going around, and I could still pinch in. Just to the right of my head, aligned with the edge of the mirror, there was a woman. Not a costume, no fake blood or glitter. She was in a pale coat like a winter jacket, straight hair, a calm, small smile that didn't show teeth. I told myself it was a reflection of something from the hallway, or someone walked by behind us when I hit the timer. But our hallway is narrow and the camera angle was head-on, not angled toward the door. The more I looked at her, the more it felt like the smile was for someone else in the room, not for the camera. And there was a detail that bothered me even though it was small. The little hair on the right side of her head was lifted, like a breeze touched it. Our apartment is sealed tight. The windows don't open all the way. We got to the party around 8:40 p.m. Fishtown looked like it wanted to be Salem for a night, cobwebs on stoops, skeleton inflatables nodding in the wind. The house itself was a narrow 2-story row home with a speaker that was too powerful for the space. The kitchen island was covered in red Solo cups and a bowl of leftover candy. I tried to let the stupid picture thing go. In the living room, as we fell into a cluster of people we half knew, someone said, "You guys look great," and I remember thinking how normal that sounded compared to what I was feeling. At 9:17 p.m., I got a DM reply to my story from an account I didn't recognize. No profile photo, no posts. It said, "That girl in the back is pretty." I clicked the little info icon to see if the account was obviously fake. It was new, made that month. My stomach did a small drop. I posted a second story of just my drink with a skull stirrer and the caption, "Alive." It felt almost like saying out loud that nothing weird was happening could force it to be true. Around 10:08 p.m., I went to the bathroom because the music felt like it was pushing on my chest. The bathroom was one of those row home bathrooms where your knees almost touch the tub when you sit. There was a folding door with slats and a cheap mirror over the sink. I closed the door and stared at myself for a second just to reset. When I opened photos to look at the original picture one more time, I held down the thumbnail out of habit and the live photo played. We all blinked and laughed, and in that split second of animation, the sixth woman's eyes moved. Not much, just a slight shift like she glanced from me to the lens. I held the phone closer to my face. The live photo has sound. Sometimes you get a snippet of someone saying, "ready." You can't hear our voices in the bathroom over the party noise when I played it later, but the audio from the picture taken in my apartment at 8:03 p.m. was clear. There was the single beep, the stretch of our clothing, a little laugh, and then right after the flash, a very soft voice near the phone mic saying, "closer." It wasn't any of us. It was too steady, like spoken for the device. I texted Liv and made her meet me by the fridge. I told her in 3 sentences because I didn't want to be dramatic, and she chewed the inside of her cheek, a thing she does when she doesn't like something. "Someone must have walked by," she said, and then she shook her head. "Our building's hallway is that gray laminate. The floor behind your shoulder is our runner. That's our house." It wasn't an argument, it was a correction. She was right. You could see the edge of the same runner we were standing on in the photo. The woman wasn't in the hall, she was inside the apartment. We left early around 11:32 p.m. and ordered a lift back. The ride home felt longer than it was. The driver had an oldies station on too low to make out the words, and the heat turned the windows blurry. In the backseat, Eli scrolled through the pictures he'd taken and said, "I don't have her." He'd taken a shot in my living room too, from almost the same spot, an instant after mine. In his version, it was just us. When we pulled up, the street was quieter, only the laundromat at the end of the block still lit. At 11:51 p.m., I unlocked our door and the deadbolt turned smoothly like it always does. The apartment smelled like leftover candle, that sickly sweet pumpkin smell that only feels cozy if you've been home all evening. The bathroom light was on, even though we both turned it off before we left. The mirror had a faint fog smear on it, the kind you get if a shower ran. We hadn't showered. Liv made a slow circuit from the kitchen to the living room like she was pretending to tidy. I went straight to the console table to plug my phone in. We have a cheap indoor camera, the kind people put in for their pets. It sits on the top shelf of our bookcase and points at the living room and the hall. I opened the app and scrolled back to 8 p.m. The timeline was dotted with motion alerts from us moving around. At 8:03 p.m. when we took the picture, the camera flagged motion, recorded a 12-second clip, and then a second clip immediately after. In the first clip, you can see us crowding together, the flash pop, and then us moving toward the door. In the second clip, after we've stepped out of frame, the hallway stays in focus like the camera is trying to find a subject. At 8:03:21, the focus shifts to the right edge of the frame where the mirror is. A pale oval, lower than my shoulder, resolves in the reflection for 3 frames and then disappears when the camera tries to re-expose. We called the non-emergency number at 12:04 a.m. because it felt more ridiculous not to. "There's no forced entry, right?" the operator asked. I said no. "Any threats?" "No. If you're concerned, we can send a patrol car to drive by." I said okay, even though I didn't know what good seeing a squad car go past at midnight would do. Liv put the chain across the door, even though the screws sat loose in the soft wood from a dozen other times we did the same thing. At 12:19 a.m., Maya texted a screenshot of her phone, Photos People album. You know how it groups faces? It had labeled each of us and then a 5th circle it called Add Name. Her phone had tagged the 6th woman in my apartment photo and cropped her face cleanly. The suggestion slider underneath said appears in 4 photos. When Maya tapped it, there weren't 4, there was only the one. The other 3 were gray squares that said unavailable with the little cloud icon. I felt the buzz of the apartment's refrigerator motor kick on through the floor, and suddenly, that was the loudest noise in the room. I went into my bedroom to get out of my costume and heard 3 light taps on our front door. Not loud, not angry, like the way your neighbor knocks when they've locked themselves out. I walked back toward the entry and looked through the peephole. The hall outside was empty in that washed-out building light. Our neighbor's wreath hung still. I stood there looking through that fisheye for a long 30 seconds and then I exhaled. When I turned away, the chain lifted and clicked once like it had pulled taut and then relaxed. It doesn't do that, it only makes a sound when someone touches it. At 12:41 a.m., the indoor camera flagged motion again. The clip shows our living room empty, then the slatted bathroom door in the back of the frame shift a 1/4 inch and stop. There's a whisper of air like a vent opening. The apartment heat had already cycled off. I replayed the clip a dozen times. The camera microphone is tinny and picks up the wrong things, but at 12:41:06, there's a little breath next to the mic and one word that might be ready. Liv didn't say it, the voice didn't sound like either of us. We didn't sleep much. I kept my phone on the nightstand face down and the indoor camera app open. At 2:14 a.m., my phone lit my room on its own. I thought it was another text, but it was a notification from Photos. You have a new memory, Halloween with friends. The preview thumbnail was our group picture, and it autoplayed the live photo loop, a flash, our small movements, and the sixth woman's smile deepening a degree like she was focusing. I swiped it away like it was something dirty. I don't know why I felt embarrassed. In the morning, we walked downstairs to talk to the building office. The manager wasn't in. A maintenance guy in a Carhartt beanie told us they could pull hallway camera footage later. He was friendly in that way people are when they don't want to catch whatever it is you're describing. Back upstairs, I checked the indoor camera's cloud storage on a laptop. The clip from 8:03 p.m. had the timestamp embedded. When I paused on the 3 frames where the focus shifted to the mirror, the oval that appeared wasn't a face. It was the curve of a cheek and the edge of a mouth. Whoever it was had leaned in at a height that put her behind me. Around noon, Eli texted a new photo. It was a screenshot of his People album tagged with all of us, and then underneath, the same ad name circle with the sixth woman's face. His phone said appears in one photo. He hadn't saved my picture to his device. He swore he'd never even opened my story. His exact words were my battery was dying all night. He was right. He'd carried around a portable charger like a toddler with a blanket. His phone still recognized her. I tried to delete the original photo at 3:22 p.m. I held my finger on the screen until the little menu popped up and tapped delete. It gave me the usual warning, this will be deleted from all your devices, and then it disappeared. I felt my shoulders drop. When I opened the recently deleted album to empty it, the picture wasn't there. I went back to recents, and it had a small heart now. Photos had featured it. Above the thumbnails it said, "This looks like a special moment." For the first time since the night started, I felt genuinely angry. We decided to go about our day like we weren't being watched by a phone. It's funny how humans can choose to just ignore a creepy thing and go make coffee. Around 5:03 p.m. I was stirring a pot on the stove and my watch buzzed. It was a notification from my doorbell, motion detected. We don't have one. Our building does. It's a panel with buzzers by the front entrance. The notification came from my Photos app, not any doorbell app. A shared video was added to your library. A 15-second clip appeared at the end of my camera roll. It showed my apartment door from the hallway as if filmed from a low angle, like a child holding the phone. You can see our doormat and my door closing. As the latch catches, a woman's face passes through the peephole from inside. It's a rapid blur, but the mouth is unmistakable. Same calm, small smile, not showing teeth. We called the police again that evening at 6:12 p.m. This time an officer actually came up and walked through. He checked the windows, the locks, asked if we had exes who might be messing with you. He was nice about it, more curious than skeptical, but at the end he said the thing I knew was coming. We can't do a lot with images. He handed me a card and circled the number for the non-emergency desk. If you hear someone inside, call 911. Otherwise, maybe stay with a friend tonight. We stayed because it felt like leaving would be worse. We turned the string lights back to white and left the kitchen light on. Liv slept on the couch with the TV on low. I went to my room and opened the camera app on selfie mode just to look at myself and calm down. The front-facing camera smooths your skin whether you want it to or not. In the bottom left corner, the little square of my last shot showed the group picture. I held it until it popped forward and it filled the screen. There we were, smiling. For a second I had the very strong impression that the sixth woman's head was closer to mine than before. Not in a measurable way, just a feeling, like when someone steps too far into your personal space and your skin notices before your brain does. At 11:07 p.m. I woke up to the sound of my phone's camera shutter. It's a very particular sound, artificial, like a sound designer's idea of nostalgia. My screen lit my ceiling and showed the camera app open by itself, the little white circle glowing like an eye. The front-facing camera was pointed at my face. My hands were under the blanket. The live photo indicator spun and captured a still and a second of video. In that second, the room was silent except for a breath not mine. When I opened the shot, the image was me, eyes half open, and over my shoulder in the dark of my doorway, a soft oval shape lower than my head. I stared until the screen timed out. I didn't save it, I didn't delete it. I put the phone face down and lay there until the outline of the doorway sunk back into the wall. In the morning, the picture wasn't in my camera roll. In its place at the end of recents was a new album automatically made by the phone, People and Pets. Under my own face, it had a second circle, add name. The suggested title beneath it said, Often Seen with Jenna. For a week, nothing else happened. I went to work, came home, cooked, and didn't take pictures unless I had to. Eli stopped sending jokes. Maya muted the group chat because it stressed her out. Liv slept with her door closed and a towel rolled at the base like she wanted to block a draft. Every night at 2:14 a.m., my phone would light for a second and then go dark without a notification. The first night I thought I imagined it. The second night I watched it happen and didn't reach for it. 2 Fridays later, I decided to take control in the smallest, dumbest way. I stood in the same spot by the console table and set the timer to 10 seconds. The apartment looked too cheerful, like a set for a commercial. Plants, string lights, the map. I took a picture of myself alone, no one else home, no mirror visible. I tilted the phone to fill the frame with only wall. When I checked, the shot was just me. Normal. I deleted it. 10 minutes later, when I opened photos again, there were 2 copies. The second had 5 thumbnails underneath it, labeled Faces Found. I tapped it, and the screen showed circles around 4 places on the plain wall where there was nothing to tag. The last thing that happened is small in the way. A small movement of a stranger's mouth can rearrange your whole nervous system. I had set my wallpaper back to a generic gradient because seeing my own pictures on the lock screen made me uneasy. On Halloween this year, I woke up at 5:54 a.m. to a soft buzzing, my upstairs neighbor's habit of vacuuming too early. I reached for my phone. The lock screen was my group photo, not the one with the pumpkin emoji, the original. The 6th woman had been cropped to fit dead center, her calm smile now the focus, my friend's shoulders framing her like she belonged there. Under the time, the small text said, "Featured photo." I changed it back to the gradient. It stayed for an hour. Then it changed itself again at 7:06 a.m., not to the group shot, but to a picture I didn't take. It was my kitchen counter in the early morning gray, the edge of the sink, the cheap knife block. A hand rested on the counter, just the heel and part of the palm, as if someone had leaned there. The hand was small, not mine, with short, squared nails and no rings. In the reflection of the black glass on the stove, where the clock reads 7:06, there were 6 shapes, 5 facing the camera, 1 half turned toward me. I didn't reply to the memory notification that popped up underneath. I didn't want to know which moments my phone thought were special now. The people album is still there with 2 circles. Every time I try to merge them, it tells me these faces are different people. And still, when I open the camera, the little square shows the last photo. It never matches what I just took. It shows that group picture, the one we shot on the runner by my front door, but with something added I can't capture no matter how many times I try. The part where the 6th person finally turns to face me and smiles like I'm late.